Chapter 204. Ning Xuema was speechless. Needless to say, it was this little thing's doing that caused her legs to be bound. "Hey, little brat, let go of me. I don't have time to joke with you." Ning Xuema's voice turned cold. She didn't like this feeling of being trapped. Besides, she really didn't have much time. Do as this Supreme One says. Jiuzun had no intention of backing down. His fingertips glowed with a faint white light as he pointed at Ning Xuema's feet. Ning Xuema felt her legs heat up and she started walking towards the edge of the cliff. Ning Xuema's expression changed slightly. She wanted to control her footsteps, but it was to no avail. The edge of the cliff was only a few feet away. "Let go of me." No matter how calm Ning Xuema was, she could no longer remain calm. She loosened her arms and tried to throw the little doll on her back away. However, the doll seemed to be a part of her body. She couldn't move it, and her feet continued to move forward uncontrollably. Was this little bastard trying to kill her? Why? Wasn't everything fine just now? Ning Xuema couldn't understand, but she didn't have time to think about it in this life and death situation. Her eyes turned cold as the dagger in her hand flashed. "Little thing, if you prank me again, I'll kill you immediately." "We'll talk about it when you have the ability," Jiuzun replied casually. He didn't stop controlling Ning Xuema's footwork. Ning Xuema didn't hesitate anymore. Her body trembled as the dagger in her hand pierced backwards like lightning. Although her legs were controlled, her upper body wasn't. This stab was extremely forceful and contained the essence of her current martial arts. Before her dagger could touch the opponent's body, her wrist was grabbed by a small hand. "What a heartless little girl. You're going to kill me now." The hand was soft and warm. The fingers couldn't even wrap around her wrist, but it was as strong as steel. Ning Xuema's wrist went numb and she couldn't move at all. "Jump down, Ben Zun will accompany you." Jiuzun's light breathing sounded beside her ear. In the next moment, Ning Xuema screamed as her body fell straight down. "Bastard! What a freak!" Ning Xuema wanted to curse out loud. The wind whistled past her ears, and her body flew down like a cannonball. "Concentrate your thoughts on the Baihui acupoint and circulate the Shenting, Sea of Qi." The little child behind her suddenly recited the incantation quickly. The wind was like thunder in her ears, but the baby's voice was exceptionally clear, as if he was speaking in her mind. At this point, most people would only be left with screaming, panic, and confusion. However, Ning Xuema was no ordinary person. Her mental fortitude was extraordinarily strong. The more dangerous the situation was, the calmer her mind would be. Hearing Jiuzun's incantation, she began to execute it immediately, focusing her thoughts on her Baihui point and circulating her Shenting and other acupoints. In just 1 or 2 seconds, under such a critical situation, she was still able to concentrate and circulate her energy. This was definitely not something an ordinary person could do. This little girl was indeed a talent that could be molded. Jiuzun, who had been attached to Ning Xuema's back, had a flash of admiration in his eyes. Strangely enough, after Ning Xuema circulated her energy according to his instructions, the speed of her falling body decreased drastically. She no longer felt like a falling cannonball, but like a kite with a broken string, wobbling in the air as she fell. Jiuzun's voice rang out again, still cold and indifferent. "Now, concentrate your qi on your legs and circle the Tao point. Take 2 steps diagonally." Ning Xuema naturally did as he said. Chapter 205. Naturally, Ning Xuema immediately followed his instructions. When she was falling down, her body was originally quite far away from the cliff. However, at this moment, it was as if she was walking in space. Unexpectedly, she actually took 2 large steps forward. The mirror-like rock was right in front of her eyes. This time, Ning Xuemo didn't wait for the child on her back to speak again. The dagger in her hand pierced into the rock wall and her body hung there. At this moment, she had already fallen several dozen feet. Although she had used that method to slow down her fall, the inertia was still not small. After stopping on the cliff, her wrist was almost dislocated from the shock, and the wound on her palm was once again dripping with blood. Looking up, it was misty. Looking down, it was so misty that she couldn't see the bottom. She was like a flag hanging in the air with him on her back, about to be pulled away at any time. Ning Xuemo's palm was burning with pain. It was also incomparably wet and slippery. Ning Xuemo held on to it with all her might. She calmed herself down and finally let out a long sigh. Fuck, that scared this baby to death. Jiao Zun's eyes flickered and there was a hint of admiration in his voice. This child is worth teaching. Now, pull out the dagger and use the method just now to descend. This child is worth teaching, my ass. Ning Xuemo's voice was cold. Jiao Zun, if I didn't succeed just now, would I have fallen to my death? If you had fallen to your death, this reputed one would have collected your corpse. Jiao Zun seemed to be comforting her. Ha! Ning Xuemo laughed coldly in her heart. If she could, she really wanted to pull him down and throw him out. She didn't speak to him anymore. She looked at the rock wall and then at the dagger in her hand, beginning to plan a safe landing. That kind of falling without any support was too frightening. She didn't want to experience it a second time even if she was beaten to death. Since the dagger could be inserted into the rock wall, she could slide down slowly. This dagger was really a good one. After being tormented by her for so long, the blade didn't even curl. Now, it had become her life-saving treasure. She carefully pulled the dagger out a little, wanting to leave a little to support herself as she slid down. Jiao Zun, who was behind her, clearly saw through her intentions. His long eyelashes drooped slightly as he formed a seal with his fingertips. Ning Xuemo's knife was pulled out automatically like a gust of wind. She heard the sound of the wind and her body fell down again. 9 Supremes, fuck your grandpa. Ning Xuemo cursed in her heart, but she didn't dare to curse out loud. It wasn't that she was afraid of the little pervert behind her, but she was afraid that once she opened her mouth, she wouldn't be able to use the psychokinesis in her body. After cursing, she would fall to her death. She cursed in her heart, but her body automatically began to circulate according to Jiao Zun's instructions. Because of her previous experience, she was much more familiar with the operation this time. Her body leaned towards the mirror-like stone wall again. Be careful. Just as her knife was about to stab into the stone wall again, a black light suddenly flashed in front of her eyes and shot towards her face. That thing came so fast that Ning Xuemo didn't even see what it was. She was currently in midair and couldn't change her position. Seeing that thing pouncing towards her, she could only use the knife in her hand to block it. However, that thing was too agile. It actually twisted its body in midair and avoided Ning Xuemo's knife. Its body bent and bounced in midair, coming for Ning Xuemo's throat again. Ning Xuemo had already used her previous move and couldn't change it in time. She could only watch helplessly as a row of small, eerie teeth came for her. TSK. A ray of white light flashed from behind her. Chapter 206. Chi. A ray of white light flashed from behind her, hitting the thing's body. The thing shrieked as a cloud of white smoke rose from its body, disappearing without a trace. Was it turned to dust, or did it run away? This thought only flashed through Ning Xuemo's mind. She was still falling, so she didn't have time to think about it. She was still fighting for her life in the air. Behind her, Jiao Zun's eyes flashed with a strange light. You can't go any closer to the stone wall. Before he could finish his sentence, Ning Xuema had already approached the stone wall for the third time, stabbing at it with her knife. Pooh! A soft sound like a balloon being popped rang out. Before Ning Xuema could react, she was sucked into a huge whirlpool that suddenly appeared on the stone wall. Fuck! Did it have to be so perverted? How could there be a whirlpool on the stone wall? The whirlpool was pitch black, and Ning Xuema couldn't help but spin inside. She felt like she had entered a washing machine that was running at high speed, spinning until her head was spinning. She subconsciously wanted to grab anything that could stabilize her body, but her surroundings were smooth and she couldn't grab anything. She couldn't have entered some super huge monster's esophagus, right? Ning Xuema wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She felt like the thing she touched just now was some kind of, if that was really the case, how could she survive? She would be digested if she entered the monster's stomach. Forget it. She'd stab it first. Maybe it would cough her out when it was in pain. Ning Xuema was a woman of action. When she thought of this, she immediately made her move. Although she was rolling on the ground, her blade was still very nimble. No! Before she could stab, her wrist was grabbed by someone, and Jiu Zun's voice rang in her ears. Let nature take its course. Ning Xuema finally noticed him. She was rolling at such a high speed, but he was still on her back, hugging her more tightly than an octopus. His small hand gripped her wrist, making her lose the strength to resist. Ning Xuema didn't even have the strength to curse, so she just closed her eyes. Alright, I'll let nature take its course. Together, we'll become feces in the monster's stomach. With a splash, the two of them fell into the water. Ning Xuema struggled for a bit in the water. She felt as if she was trapped in a loose and tight cage. She had clearly fallen into the water and was surrounded by water, but when she stretched out her hand, she could not feel the presence of water. Paw! A soft sound came from beside her ear, as if some kind of protective membrane had been broken. The water from all sides surged over in an instant, drowning her. Ning Xuema, was there a protective layer around her just now? Needless to say, it was set up by the 9 Supremes on his back. No wonder she didn't feel anything when she was rolling down. What was he trying to do? Just now, he had forced her to jump off the cliff, but now, he was teaching her martial arts in a life-and-death situation. It felt like a joke in the legends. When an eagle wanted its baby eagle to fly, it would usually kick the baby eagle off the cliff. If it didn't die from the fall, it meant that it could fly. The old eagle would at least wait until the young eagle's feathers were fully grown before doing so. But she wasn't prepared at all. She was even a MF trash, and he had just kicked her off the cliff. Not dying from the fall wasn't because she was lucky, but because her mental fortitude was strong enough, and her reflexes were superb. Ning Xuema felt that Jiu Zun wasn't doing this to train her, but to do a perverted limit experiment, using her as a test subject. Chapter 207. Pervert. Her heart burned with anger as she used both her hands and legs to quickly emerge from the water. She looked around, but it was pitch black and she could not see anything. Ning Xuema initially thought that she had fallen into a monster's stomach and that the water beneath her was its gastric juices. However, the smell around her did not seem like it. No matter what animal it was, its gastric juices were sour and the smell was unpleasant. However, the smell here was pleasant. She could faintly smell herbs and flowers, cool and fragrant. There was no light at all. Everything around her was pitch black. What was this place? Ning Xuema tried to swim forward. She could hear the sound of water splashing around her ears. That was the sound she made herself. She couldn't hear anything else. It was as if she was the only one left in the world. Ning Xuema swam for a while before her limbs suddenly stopped. Jiu Zun, who had been lying on her back like gangrene, had disappeared without a trace. Her back was empty and she felt unprecedentedly relaxed. She was silent for a moment before she called out tentatively, "Jozun." There was no response from her surroundings. She could only hear her own heavy breathing. She did not give up and called out a few more times. There was no response and she could not hear any movement from him. Was he invisible? Or had he left? Ning Xuema naturally did not think that anything had happened to the child since he was so calm. If she could survive in a place like this, the child's martial arts were so perverted. Naturally, he could do it even more. Was it another perverted experiment to leave her here? It couldn't be, right? She remembered that he had wanted to stop her when she had approached the stone wall. However, it had happened so quickly that she could not react in time. Ning Xuema continued to swim forward, the surrounding darkness giving her the illusion that she was swimming in a black hole. She could not see the edge and she could not find her own kind. The darkness gave birth to loneliness and the bone-chilling loneliness made one feel despair. The water beneath her was icy cold, causing all her exposed parts to hurt from the cold. At this moment, she finally experienced the benefits of the robe. Wherever the robe covered, there was a faint warmth surrounding it. Ning Xuema had no doubt that if she didn't wear this robe, her entire body would probably be frozen into a lump of ice. No wonder people said that the ninth summit was the most dangerous place. There were too many unbelievable things here. Were there other ferocious beasts in the water? They were hiding in the dark, waiting to ambush her. As if responding to her sudden thought, the sound of splashing water came from the depths of the dark water. The sound was not soft, as if a large aquatic beast was about to emerge. Ning Xuema felt goosebumps all over her body. Her body tensed up and she looked back, but it was too dark and she still couldn't see anything. However, there was a ferocious aura pressing down on her from the depths of the darkness, causing her to feel cold all over and almost unable to breathe. Splash, splash. The sound of water splashing was getting louder and louder. A great danger was approaching in the dark. Ning Xuema's hands and feet were cold. The water around her surged forward in waves, rolling up and down like the tide. Judging by the sound and the posture, it couldn't be some prehistoric aquatic beast, could it? For example, a sea monster like a long-necked dragon. Before she could finish her thought, two green lanterns suddenly lit up in the depths of the darkness. In such absolute darkness, a little light was quite glaring. Ning Xuema instinctively closed her eyes and quickly opened them again. She turned back to look at the two lanterns. Chapter 208. In such absolute darkness, even a little bit of light was quite glaring. Ning Xuema subconsciously closed her eyes and quickly opened them again. She turned around and looked at the two lanterns. The two lanterns were the size of common palace lanterns. They were slanted in the shape of a date seed, shining with a cold light. The green color was frightening. Ning Xuema's head buzzed. How were these lanterns? They were clearly the monster's eyes. If its eyes were already so big, then how big would its body be? Ning Xuema did not even think about it. She turned around and swam forward. She was not on the same level as the monster. She did not even have the chance to fight it. She was not even worth a bite of its snack. However, just as she swam a few feet away, the wind behind her was fierce. The water below her suddenly churned up a few feet high wave, rolling Ning Xuema up to the top of the wave. Then, a bloody mouth that was as big as a blue whale's closed in on her on the top of the wave. This scene was like the most terrifying nightmare. Ning Xuema was frozen on the top of the wave. She could not dodge at all. Was she going to die here silently? She had been struggling in this world for so long. No. She was not willing. There must be another way. Even if she died, she would fight with this thing. Perhaps this thing was only big in size and looked good on the outside but was useless. She suddenly felt hot in her sea of chi. Her body that was about to freeze suddenly could move. She immediately turned around and swam past the giant water monster's mouth, diving into the water. She knew that she would not be able to outrun this monster if she simply ran away. The only thing she could do now was to fight with her life. The sound of splashing water was louder than the sound of the stormy sea. Ning Xuema's body was being swept up by the waves, causing her body to sway from side to side. This thing's body was so huge that there must be a big part of it in the water. She wanted to try stabbing it. She determined the monster's location based on the direction of the water flow. Then, she swam over with all her strength. She finally touched the smooth and sticky scales. She quickly touched it and was shocked again. This thing's scales were as big as a dustpan. Compared to it, the knife in her hand was like an embroidery needle. How could it hurt it? Ning Xuema had her suspicions, but it was still a chance for her to survive. Therefore, Ning Xuema fiercely stabbed into the gap between the scales. A long whistle that was even more ear-piercing than the whistle of a train rang out in the darkness. Before Ning Xuema could dodge her attack, she was sent flying by a powerful force. It flew in an unpredictable direction. Ning Xuema finally understood that she had stabbed the monster's tail with her knife. That had angered the monster, so it had sent her flying with its tail. Ning Xuema almost fainted from the whipping of its tail. Her body flew into the depths of the darkness like a shooting star, and there was nothing she could do. If there were rocks in the water, she was afraid that she would bump into thousands of peach blossoms. Ning Xuema felt that she was a jinx today. Whatever she thought of would come true. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she immediately saw a dense mountain of rocks pressing down on her. Just like in many melodramatic movies, the rock had sharp edges. Once she bumped into it, she would be skewered by it and become a barbecue for the sea monster. At this time, she had no choice but to close her eyes. A thought flashed through her mind. Usually, at this time, a hero would come to save the damsel in distress. From then on, he would have a passionate love affair with the female lead. Chapter 209. Would there also be some valiant warrior descending from the sky and taking her into his arms? Bang! She bumped into something hard and soft. She quickly opened her eyes and was stunned. It can't be. There really was a hero who came to save her. At that moment, she really fell into someone's arms. What was even more strange was that this man actually had Stallone's face. In front of Ning Xuema's widened eyes, the man who resembled Stallone carried her and floated to the shore. Not bad. It was the shore. Her feet finally touched the ground. What happened next made Ning Xuema feel like she was in a dream. The chivalrous man placed her on the ground. Then, he pulled out a machine gun out of nowhere and fired at the monster that was chasing after them. The sound of gunshots rang out like a dense rain. Ning Xuema stood there with her hand on her forehead. She felt that her worldview was a mess. God, could it be that her idol Stallone had also transmigrated? It was too unbelievable. He actually transmigrated with a gun. He was also a foreigner, but he was much more fortunate than Tom. Her chest was still in great pain from the monster's tail. Her blood was surging crazily, and there was a metallic taste in her throat. She forced herself not to vomit blood. It was so painful. Her ribs wouldn't be broken, right? She subconsciously reached out and touched her chest. Sure enough, she felt that a large part of her chest had caved in, and 3 of her ribs were broken. The monsters on the mountain basically had scales that couldn't be penetrated by guns. This monster in the water was so big. Its scales wouldn't be so easy to penetrate, right? Although Stallone's heroic shooting skills were like Xiao Li's flying dagger, it was useless if it couldn't penetrate the monster's scales. Ning Xuema raised her head worriedly. Sure enough, she saw Stallone's machine gun spitting out a long tongue of fire. It swept across the black monster's body, creating countless sparks. The countless bullets seemed to have hit steel, making clanging sounds and bouncing off in all directions. It really didn't work. The monster was obviously enraged. It swam toward the shore while withstanding the countless bullets. Its head was raised like a small island in the sea, and its mouth was full of fangs that gleamed coldly. Ning Xuema's heart was beating wildly. She turned her head to look for a weapon by the shore, but there were only rocks on the shore. If only she had an armor-piercing bullet right now. It would definitely be able to pierce through its thick armor. She took a step back and seemed to have stepped on something. She looked down and her heart started to beat wildly. The heavens had finally opened their eyes. She was actually stepping on a handheld rocket launcher. She was overjoyed. She was a special agent, and she was very familiar with firearms in her previous life. Her marksmanship was also top-notch. But ever since she came to this world, she had never touched this thing again. Now that she saw it, it was as if she had seen her closest relative in the world. She picked up the rocket launcher and carried it on her shoulder. With this thing, why would she be afraid of any monster? She immediately aimed at the black monster that was rolling toward her like a gust of wind. She pulled the trigger, and the shell shot out with a flash of fire. Her marksmanship was still extremely accurate, and the bullet hit the monster's neck. The monster roared angrily, and a huge bullet hole appeared on its neck. Blood rained down like a waterfall. Success! Ning Xuema's lips curled up slightly. No matter how powerful a monster was, it would still be defeated when it encountered a modern weapon. However, the monsters in this world were quite abnormal, especially the monsters in the 9th peak. They were all at level 7 or 8 psychokinesis. Perhaps they were like aliens that couldn't be killed and had super strong self-healing abilities. Chapter 210. As if to verify her words, the monster did not die after being hit by the bullet. It only let out a long roar, and the wound on its neck quickly healed. In a short while, it was as good as new. Ning Xuema was speechless. Let's go. My gun is out of bullets. The young version of the hero, Stallone, ran towards her, pulled her hand, and ran. Ning Xuema also realized that her rocket launcher only had one shell. She had no choice but to run. She could only hope that the monster was an aquatic beast and could not go ashore. However, things in this world were really hard to predict. There were quite a lot of amphibious monsters. Sure enough, she and the hero had just run a few dozen meters when they heard the sound of footsteps behind them. It was like the roar of a crane, shaking the entire ground. Ning Xuema looked back in the midst of her rush. She almost wanted to cry. Fuck, this guy was not a sea monster. It was Godzilla. What kind of magical country did she transmigrate to? She vaguely felt that something was wrong, but in such an emergency situation, she did not have the time to think about it. Fortunately, she was not alone this time. She had a companion. And it was the young version of Stallone. His palm was warm and dry, and his palm was full of calluses. It was full of the iron-blooded toughness of a pure man. Ning Xuema ran with him. After all, she had struggled for so long. At that moment, she was already at the end of her rope. Her footsteps were getting heavier and heavier. In the end, she could not keep up with the hero Stallone's footsteps. The monster behind them was rapidly approaching. Obviously, it did not want to let the two of them go. And this vast world was boundless. Their running speed could not be compared to the monster behind them. It was only a matter of time before they were eaten. A thought arose in Ning Xuema's mind. Actually, if she could die with her idol, it would not be too unjust, right? It was better than dying alone. With this thought, she felt her footsteps become heavier. Even her hero's steps slowed down. The shadow of death loomed over her head. Ning Xuema suddenly flew into the arms of the hero beside her. She hugged his neck and kissed his lips. She wanted to fulfill her dream before she died. Her dream was to see the young Stallone and give him a big kiss. Stallone's body stiffened slightly, but he did not dodge. Just as Ning Xuema's little mouth was about to touch her idol's lips, a corner of the dusky sky seemed to be suddenly torn open. A figure floated down, and before that person landed, a white light shot out of his hand. Ning Xuema's body went numb, and she fell from her idol's arms. Then, she was pulled by a hand and staggered. Like a fluttering flag, her body involuntarily followed him and leaped 70 to 80 feet away. At this moment, the monster finally caught up. With a swing of its tail, it sent his idol, Stallone, who was still standing at the same spot, flying into the air. Ning Xuema was shocked. Stallone. She wanted to rush over to rescue him. Idiot, this is an illusion. Wake up. The voice of Jiu Zun, whom she had not heard for a long time, rang in her ears. At the same time, a surge of energy surged into her palm, following her blood vessels and rushing to the top of her head. Her mind exploded, and her entire body shuddered. Illusion. None of this was real. She suddenly looked up and saw Stallone's body in the air melting like snow under the scorching sun. Chapter 211. She turned to look at the huge, friendless black Godzilla, but that thing was still standing in the same spot, glaring at her fiercely with its large, lantern-like eyes. Seeing Ning Xuema looking at it, it immediately raised its head and roared, pouncing towards her. Damn, if this was an illusion, why was this thing still here? This thing's body was too huge, and when it pounced over, it brought with it a tornado, almost sweeping Ning Xuema and Jiu Zun's bodies up. Ning Xuema wanted to turn and run, but her footsteps were heavy, as if her feet were chained, and she couldn't take a single step. Damn it! Jiu Zun cursed under his breath and raised his palm. White light spread out like a net above the two of them, blocking Godzilla's mouth that was about to bite them. It's a creature of your imagination, quickly think of it as a useless bug. Jiu Zun shouted. His small face instantly turned as white as a sheet of paper. This monster's strength was too strong, and he almost couldn't resist it. What was this little girl's mind filled with? She could actually imagine such a perverted monster, and even with his current strength, he couldn't withstand it. This illusion was her imagination, so the things inside had to be changed through her. Roar! The monster's body was blocked by the white net, and it was instantly enraged, slamming against it with all its might. It was a figment of her imagination. Ning Xuema's thoughts flashed through her mind like lightning, recalling the series of events that had just happened. It seemed that whatever she thought of, it would immediately appear here, although she didn't know what was going on, since she knew that this was her imagination, it was easy to handle. She was in charge of her imagination. Quickly think of it as a bug, a little snake. Whatever it is, it's your inner demon, and it won't disappear on its own, Jiu Zun quickly explained. As expected, Ning Xuema closed her eyes slightly, looking like she was going to focus and follow his instructions. Unexpectedly, the moment she opened her eyes, she turned around and scooped up a strange-looking weapon from the ground. What was she doing? Ning Xuema raised her head. Her originally messy bun had already loosened up and draped over her shoulders like flowing water. She slung the strange-looking weapon over her shoulder and leapt, flying out of the monster's range. Standing on a large rock not far away, she smiled at him. Jiu Zun, I'll have to trouble you to hold on. The little girl's smile was sweet, her movements elegant and dashing. Just as she finished speaking, the gigantic monster became even more irritable. Its roar shook the heavens and earth as it charged towards Jiuzun even more ferociously. Its strength had more than doubled. Jiuzun was already having a hard time, and now, it was even harder for him to hold on. With a soft sound, the white net of light was torn apart by the monster's bite. Its sharp teeth bit towards Jiuzun's small body. That little girl did it on purpose. She wanted to take revenge on him. Jiuzun was a seasoned veteran. His body rose and he retreated like water. His movements were fast and indescribable, as free and unrestrained as the clouds. According to his own estimation, he could retreat more than 100 feet, just enough to escape the monster's huge mouth. However, he didn't expect that just as he retreated halfway, a rope would suddenly appear on the ground. He couldn't dodge in time and the rope tripped him on his leg. His body staggered, and he nearly fell down. In this short delay, the monster's bloody mouth was already less than 2 feet away from his head. Its saliva was almost dripping onto his body. Chapter 2:12. The stench was so strong that it made one want to vomit. Damn it! Jiuzun was about to change his move when his legs were suddenly tightened. The rope that had almost tripped him had wrapped itself around his legs in the blink of an eye. He was halfway through his move when he was pulled by a force, falling to the ground with a thud. Just as the monster's mouth was about to chomp down on his clothes, a deafening bang rang out. The monster's body shook violently as a bloody hole appeared on its head. Fresh blood spurted out like an open shower, splattering onto Jiuzun's face and head. Jiuzun took the opportunity to roll away, finally escaping from the monster's mouth. He leapt up and looked towards Ning Xuema, who was not far away. The girl's eyes were bright, her mouth curved like a bean pod. Jiuzun, be careful. Seeing little Wimp cut an unprecedented sorry figure because of her, Ning Xuema simply felt refreshed and refreshed. Who asked you to force me to jump off the cliff again? Let a pervert like you do the damned limit test again. She wanted him to have a taste of being controlled by someone else, of not being able to control his own life and death. Also, this was indeed her illusory realm. As long as she concentrated a little, she could control everything in this space. For example, she could casually pick up a gun, weaken the brat Jiuzun, or increase the monster's strength. It felt so good to be God. Jiuzun squinted his eyes, a light flickering in his pupils. This girl had almost no psychokinesis in her, but her true willpower was astounding. Most people wouldn't be able to control the things in the illusion even if they knew that it was their own illusion. After all, the human heart was complicated, and there were too many things that could be stored in it. A slight thought could cause many changes, and they would be swallowed by the illusion they created. Even if there were some geniuses, it would be impressive if they could kill their inner demons in the illusion. No one had been able to completely control the situation. The wound on the monster's forehead healed quickly. With a loud roar, it pounced towards Jiuzun once more. Ning Xuema stood with her rocket launcher in high spirits. She was going to play with this Jiuzun. She wanted to see what tricks this Jiuzun would play under such circumstances. The monster opened its mouth and spat out a white, frosty air that enveloped Jiuzun. Ning Xuema knew that Jiuzun would definitely be able to dodge it with his skills. She had even calculated in her mind which direction he would hide in and which direction she would conjure the rope. But he didn't expect that little brat to just stand there, with no intention of dodging at all. The white chi enveloped Jiuzun's entire body, instantly freezing him into an ice sculpture. The monster's movements were as fast as lightning. It opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. Ning Xuema suddenly widened her eyes. Heavens, she really didn't want to kill this little brat. Could he really be dead? She promptly fired a rocket launcher at the monster's heart, causing it to fall to the ground with a loud thud. In a flash, a snow-white broadsword appeared in Ning Xuemo's hand. She jumped onto the monster's body and slashed at its stomach. Because his emotions were unstable at the moment, he was a little flustered. While she was panicking, the monster's stomach actually became harder than steel. Her slash was rebounded, causing her wrist to go numb and the blade to almost fly out of her hand. She was shocked once more. She sucked in a breath and tried to concentrate, imagining that the monster's stomach was softer than cotton. However, it was obvious that it didn't work this time. The monster's stomach was still as hard as before. She almost slipped as she stood on it. Chapter 213. This couldn't go on. How long could a person last in the monster's stomach? Although he was strong enough, this was still within her consciousness. She gritted her teeth and another plasma cutter appeared in her hand, slicing towards the monster's stomach. Jiuzun, you have to hold on. You'd be a coward if you died here. The layer of skin on the monster's stomach was finally cut open. Ning Xuemo regretted imagining the monster to be so big. It was the size of a building, and its stomach was huge as well. Although Ning Xuemo had found the right spot, it still took a lot of effort to cut open such a thick layer of flesh to find its stomach. After cutting open the monster's stomach, a shiny Japanese military knife appeared in her hand. About a quarter of an hour later, she finally cut open the monster's stomach. The stomach was about the size of a small house. Ning Xuemo resisted the acrid stench that assailed her nostrils and peeked inside. Other than some food scraps, she couldn't see anything else. Ning Xuemo looked at the bubbling gastric juices and her heart slowly sank. Could it be that it was already digested? It can't be that fast, right? This gastric juice wasn't sulfuric acid. How could it corrode so quickly? She steeled her heart and was about to jump in to take a look when a voice rang out from behind her. No need to look, I'm here. It was a child's clear voice, but it carried a hint of laziness. Ning Xuemo slowly turned back to see Jiuzun standing not too far away, examining the plasma cutter she had thrown aside. You weren't swallowed. Ning Xuemo jumped down from the monster's stomach. Nonsense. Jiuzun's reply was casual. He seemed to still be interested in the machine, not even raising his head. I clearly saw you being swallowed. Ning Xuemo didn't believe that there was something wrong with her eyes. It swallowed rocks. Jiuzun began to study the rocket launcher on the ground. Ning Xuemo finally understood. You used a trick just now. Of course. Am I supposed to wait to be swallowed? This is an illusion created by my will. Shouldn't you follow my will completely? The illusion is indeed yours, but the main body is real. In your illusion, my power will be weakened, but I won't be so weak that I won't be able to withstand a single blow. Perhaps it was because he was happy to see something new, so he spoke more than usual. So that was how it was. Ning Xuemo wrung her hands in her heart. When she looked up, her expression changed slightly. Jiuzun placed the rocket launcher on his frail shoulders and aimed it at her. His small hand was on the trigger. Fuck. She had already set the rocket launcher to fire, and now there was a shell on it. Hero, let's talk nicely. Put that thing down. Ning Xuemo tried his best to concentrate, trying to make the shell on the rocket launcher disappear, but it was useless. It's useless. These things will appear with just a thought. There won't be any other changes. Jiuzun raised the rocket launcher. He still had the body of a 1-year-old child, and it was a little comical for him to carry such a large weapon of mass destruction. However, Ning Xuemo couldn't bring herself to smile. Be careful. Don't misfire. She reminded him, then threatened, don't think that it's easy for me to use it. This thing has a huge recoil. You'll be injured even if you fire it. Is that so? Jiuzun raised his arm. With a loud bang, the shell flew over Ning Xuema's head and hit the monster behind her. Chapter 2:14. Is that so? Jiuzun raised his arm and with a loud bang, a missile flew over Ning Xuema's head and into the monster behind her. Unexpectedly, they also hit the spot where Ning Xuema had just hit. The two shells left a bullet hole. Did he have to be so perverse? How could an ancient person like him be so accurate with his gun? Ning Xuema looked at Jiuzun, who was still standing there calmly, and was speechless. The reaction force is not small, but it's still within this sovereign's control. Jiuzun aimed the rocket launcher at her again. What's this called? Rocket launcher. Ning Xuema sighed, looking at him with watery eyes. You weren't swallowed just now, so why didn't you appear earlier? You made me risk my life to break open this monster's stomach to save you. I didn't want you to die, I wanted you to live well. I know. Otherwise, do you think you can still stand here and talk to this sovereign so casually? Ning Xuema pursed her lips. You said that this is my mental world. In this world, she was the boss. Your control over your mental world isn't very good. You're still lacking a bit. This sovereign has 10,000 ways to make you suffer from chi deviation here, never to leave again. Jiuzun's voice was still indifferent. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed, and she looked like she was admitting defeat. Alright, I admit defeat. You're the one who's more capable. How are we going to leave? She had already killed the so-called inner demon, so why was it still here? There are so many weird things in your mental world. Jiuzun's hand touched the rocket launcher, and his eyes glanced at the cutting machine on the ground. He was 70% convinced of what Ning Xuema had said yesterday. Although he had never seen these things before, he could tell that the parts were all very mature. They weren't things that could just appear out of thin air. This monster was also a species he had never seen before, and the man who had come to save her, he narrowed his eyes. Who is that man? Ning Xuema didn't hide it. My idol. A tough guy. Idol? It's someone you worship. Ning Xuema explained. You admire someone like this? Jiuzun felt that her sense of beauty was a little strange. What was there to like about such a big and burly man? That's right, that's a real man. A standard man's true colors. Jiuzun looked at her again. So you threw yourself into his arms. Have you always liked to take advantage of men? His voice was cold. Ning Xuema secretly rolled her eyes. He made it sound like she was a perverted woman. She had lived for so long, but she had never really kissed a man before. Just now, I thought I was going to die, so I kissed my idol so that I wouldn't die with regrets. What do you mean by taking advantage of men? Ning Xuema retorted. I just want to kiss him. But you've kissed me too. Jiuzun's tone was slightly unfriendly. Dear, you're just a little doll. What kind of man are you? Ning Xuema was speechless. She didn't want to talk about this topic with him anymore. How are we going to get out of here? She looked at herself, still feeling that it was a little unreal. I remember that we fell into a whirlpool cave and fell here. How did it become an illusion of my own mind? You want to know? Of course. Then go out and see for yourself. Jiuzun raised his hand, and a wave of white light shot over. Ning Xuema felt her vision brighten, and then her forehead hurt. Her vision turned black, and then the white light dissipated. Chapter 2:15. She opened her eyes abruptly, realizing that her surroundings had completely changed. The dark deep sea, Godzilla, strange rocks, they were all gone. She was lying on a clean mountain rock, a little doll nestled on her chest. Their bodies were pressed tightly together, their hands clasped together in an intimate position. His head was resting on her chest, and his silver hair spread out like moonlight. It was as smooth as silk on her skin, and it tickled her. Wait a minute. Ning Xuema seemed to have sensed something as she lowered her head to look at her body. Then, she was embarrassed. Her body was practically naked. The white robe was nowhere to be seen, and only the hand-sewn panties were still there to at least cover her body. The little doll was only wearing a dudu as he lay on her body, his limbs pressed tightly against her without any gap between them. Although Ning Xuema had always been thick-skinned, she was still struck by lightning when she saw herself in this state. Damn, this little brat was acting like a rogue. She raised her hand, wanting to push the doll off her chest. A faint white light flashed in front of her eyes, and Jiuzun, who was lying on her chest, suddenly disappeared. Ning Xuema suddenly sat up. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked around. Then, she secretly ground her teeth. In the blink of an eye, Jiuzun had already changed his attire. The dudu was gone, and he was still wearing the little robe that was more elegant than the clouds and whiter than the snow. He stood there casually, as if the naked doll lying in her arms just now wasn't him. He casually tossed a robe over. Put it on. Ning Xuema couldn't be bothered to settle the score with him for the time being. She hurriedly put the robe on. What did you mean by that? She felt that Jiuzun was a little perverted, but he didn't have such perverted hobbies. Jiuzun walked forward without turning back. You're as unconscious as a pig. Lightning can't wake you up, so Ben Zun can only go in to get you. How could she not be awakened by lightning? She wouldn't even wake up if he kicked her. He could only take the risk of using the spirit anchoring spell to enter her consciousness. Using the spirit anchoring spell, he could only do it in this position. You're the pig. I fainted because of this strange cave, right? What was going on? Where is this place? Ning Xuema quickly caught up with him and retorted bluntly. Ning Xuema looked all around. She could already tell that this was a cave. Moreover, it was a grotesquely shaped cave. The walls of the cave were made of dark blue, translucent rocks. Deep within the rocks, there seemed to be water flowing. It was like a crystal tunnel. When Ning Xuema saw this, she had an illusion. She walked in here as if she was walking in a sightseeing underwater tunnel. It was a grotesque scene, but she couldn't see where the entrance she fell into was. Looking ahead, the passageway was extremely long and winding. It was unknown where it led to. Little girl, you're very lucky. You actually ran into the 10,000-year stone essences market today. We are now in its stomach. As for why you fainted, it's because there's an aura here that can cause anyone who enters to fall into their inner demons. In there, the more you fear something, the more likely it will happen, until your soul is swallowed up by the inner demons and your soul disperses. She clearly had the appearance of a child, and her voice was tender and crisp, but her tone was extremely light, like flowing ice hitting the mountain rocks. Although it sounded indescribably pleasant, it was also a little strange. After he explained so much, Ning Xuema understood most of it. However, there were still a few things she didn't understand. She immediately asked the key questions. What is a stone essence? Is it an animal or a plant? Since everyone who enters will fall into their inner demons, why didn't you? Chapter 2:16. The stone spirit is a spiritual object formed by absorbing the essence of heaven and earth. It can be big or small and can change into anything. It has no specific shape and hides in the mountains. It only appears once every 1,000 years. The place and time of appearance are not fixed. It only appeared once every 1,000 years and she had caught it. She was really lucky. Ning Xuema didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The stone spirit's explanation reminded her of the mountain gods and the myths and legends of her time. If it was formed by the spiritual energy of the mountains, wouldn't it be a mountain god? They were in the stomach of a mountain god. Why was this explanation so terrifying? So, were they in its esophagus or its intestines? How were they going to get out? Did they have to go through the back door? Would they encounter other food scraps that the stone spirit had swallowed along the way? Countless questions hovered in Ning Xuema's mind. She picked the most important one. How are we going to get out? I don't know. The baby answered simply. It's my first time here too. Fine. Ning Xuema shut her mouth. She was indeed the king of luck. She had only been here for a short while and she had already encountered such a thing. Could there be treasures in the stomach of the mountain spirit? It must have eaten many good things all these years. Maybe there were some rare treasures. She looked around but didn't see any danger. The tunnel was very clean. The material under her feet was the same as the cave walls, like crystal bricks. It didn't hurt her feet when she stepped on it. Occasionally, there would be scattered large rocks of different shapes and sizes in the tunnel. Ning Xuema had just woken up on one of the rocks. Another large boulder appeared in front of her. Ning Xuema sized up the boulder with a glance, and her heart suddenly moved. The shape of the rock was actually like a giant python. It was long and the front part vaguely looked like a snake's head with its mouth open. It was even more perfect than the masterpiece of a master. It was also the same color as the surrounding cave walls. It was slightly transparent and there was a ball of shadow inside. Ning Xuema looked inside for a moment and her eyes widened in shock. Why does it look like there's something sealed inside? Ah, there's really a python inside. And a skinless one too. These stones were originally formed by animals that accidentally trespassed. Jiao Zun seemed to know everything. Ning Xuema recalled the huge rocks she saw when she passed by. Sure enough, they looked like all kinds of animals. There were more and more strangely shaped rocks in front of them. Ning Xuema observed carefully and found that some animals were sealed in these strange rocks. They seemed to be formed according to the size of the animals. It looked a little like the amber used to seal small animals. The amber was formed when pine resin dripped down and wrapped around the worms. These animals were so huge. How could they be sealed here? Why didn't they have any skin? Jiao Zun, who was walking in front, suddenly stopped in front of a tall and thin rock. There weren't many things that could make Jiao Zun stop in his tracks. Ning Xuema gave up on observing a tiger-shaped rock and walked briskly to the tall and skinny rock. Upon closer inspection, his expression changed slightly. There's someone inside. There was indeed a person sealed in the rock. Not only did this person not shed his skin, he was even wearing clothes. The translucent layer of stone that enveloped this person was very thin. In addition, this layer of stone had strong anti-corrosion properties. The person inside was still the same as when he was alive. Therefore, Ning Xuema could see the person's face and body clearly. Chapter 217. It was an exceptionally handsome man with sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a high nose bridge, and thin lips. He had a green jade hairpin on his head and wore a light blue robe. The quality of this blue robe was obviously very good. Its color was as soft as the lake water, and there were scaly patterns on it. A sparkling and translucent white jade belt was tied around his waist, and a jade pendant with a pair of fish hung from the belt. His standing posture was somewhat strange. Both of his arms were folded in front of him, as if he was hugging something. His expression seemed to be both painful and joyful. Beside his feet was a strange-looking sword. He was frozen in place, and it was unknown how long he had been standing there, but he seemed to have turned into a fossil. Ning Xuema's gaze circled around the handsome guy's face before landing on his collar. On the left side of his collar, there was a cloud embroidered, while on the right side, there were 9 stars embroidered. This man was from the Sun-Moon sect. Furthermore, looking at those stars, he was the ancestor's direct disciple. In the Sun-Moon sect, only the ancestor's direct disciples could embroider 9 stars. Who could this be? The ancestor had a total of 18 disciples, and 12 of them were still alive. Their whereabouts were also well documented. This person was obviously one of the 6 disciples who had already passed away. Of the 6 disciples, the highest had cultivated to Earth Realm level 9. Although their lifespan had been extended, they were not immortal. 5 of them had died of natural causes, which could be considered a good ending. Only the 5th disciple had disappeared in the prime of his life. As for how he had disappeared, it was too long ago, and the Sun-Moon sect style of doing things was relatively mysterious. Therefore, no one knew. Ning Xuema only knew from a few scattered records that the missing disciple of the ancestor was not only a rare martial arts genius, but also a prince with a high position and great talent. He had broken through to Earth Realm level 6 at a young age, and was considered one of the most likely candidates to break through the life and death barrier. He was also the most favored disciple of the ancestor, and the most complete and profound martial arts he had been imparted to him. If he had ascended the throne, he would have definitely become the Emperor of the Ages. However, no one expected that when he was 27 or 28 years old, he would suddenly disappear. Since then, the ancestor had added another rule to his disciple selection, and that was to not accept disciples of the imperial family. This was also one of the main reasons why the ancestor did not accept a genius like Ji Yunhuang. Ning Xuema looked at the peerless man sealed in the stone. Needless to say, this should be the missing prince, the ancestor's favorite 5th disciple. Ning Xuema shot a glance at the child beside her. The child was currently raising his head to look at the translucent stone sculpture. He did not say anything, and his face was expressionless. Only his pair of blue eyes were like an ice lake under the moonlight, faintly flickering with light. Ning Xuema didn't look at him anymore. She just gently stroked the stone sculpture of the prince. His skin didn't fall off. How did he die? Jiu Zun's voice was indifferent. His cultivation is high, so he won't be injured by the heaven-splitting wind that entered his mouth. That's why his skin is still intact. However, he didn't manage to escape the inner demons of his nightmares and his soul was scattered. It turned out that the inner demons of the nightmares were so powerful. It could actually scatter the soul of such a genius expert. For a newbie like her, if Jiu Zun hadn't used a special method to enter her mind to save her, she would probably have been devoured by the inner demons as well. Not even a speck of her soul would be left behind. Only this small body would be left here, like the humans and animals who had mistakenly entered, turned into a small stone sculpture. Wait, he said that there was a heaven-splitting wind at the entrance that could tear the flesh of those who had mistakenly entered. Then why was she fine? Chapter 218. She recalled the skin-like thing she had touched when she was tumbling in the whirlpool. At that time, she had thought that she had touched the monster's intestines. Now, it seemed like there was a protective barrier around her, preventing her from being injured by the Tianlai wind and allowing her to land safely. Needless to say, that protective barrier must have been set up by Jiu Zun behind her. This meant that Jiu Zun had already saved her twice without batting an eyelid after meeting the stone spirit. Alright, seeing that he had saved her twice, she would magnanimously not pursue the matter of him forcing her to jump off the cliff. She glanced at the little brat beside her. She hadn't paid much attention to him earlier, but now it seemed that the little fellow's complexion wasn't too good. He was paler than before, and even his originally bright red lips were like faded petals, making one's heart ache. "Jiuzun, thank you for saving my life twice. I won't pursue the matter of you teasing me in the past. Let's call it even." "Even?" Jiuzun's lips twitched slightly, but he didn't comment. Because of this little girl's sudden intrusion, his cultivation this time had been wasted, and he had been unable to return to his human form. His cultivation had been greatly reduced, not even a fifth of his usual strength. He had only wanted to send her down the mountain quickly, but he hadn't expected to meet the stone spirit again. To save her twice, he had used up more than half of his current cultivation. It was really one disaster after another. Although this little girl was a very special existence, she was also a real troublemaker. He was speechless. The debt between them was not even now, but he would get it back sooner or later. He wouldn't let his efforts be in vain. He didn't look at the stone statue anymore, and strode forward. "Let's go." His legs were short, and he didn't use any special methods to walk. Ning Xuema caught up with him in a few steps, and asked casually, "Since you're familiar with the ancestor, you must know the person in the stone statue, right? So what if I know him, and so what if I don't?" Jiuzun didn't stop walking. "That person is the ancestor's missing disciple. Now that we finally found him here, aren't you going to help us get his body out? Even if you don't return him to the ancestor, at least let him rest in peace. The body is just a bag of skin, no different from grass and trees. Since he has already turned into a mountain rock, let him stay here." The 9 Supremes were unmoved. They had no intention of burying the prince's body. How cold-blooded. Ning Xuema overtook him in a few steps and said in a gossipy voice, "Is this the ancestor's 5th disciple? He was so handsome. I heard that he is a prince." "You've heard quite a lot." Jiuzun gave her a few words of evaluation. "It said that he's a man of great talent and bold vision. If he manages to ascend to the throne, he might become an emperor for all eternity. There must be a lot of girls who like him." Ning Xuema continued to gossip. "Ah." Jiuzun's reply was even shorter this time. Ning Xuema originally wanted to get more information from him, but she didn't expect this guy to be so calm and collected. She didn't get anything out of him. She gently pursed her lips and continued to gossip about this prince, telling him almost everything she knew. She was eloquent and could be said to be incessant. However, Jiuzun rarely responded to her gossip. At most, he would reply with 3 to 5 words. After she talked for 3 to 4 minutes, he finally said, "Don't be a love-struck fool. He's already been dead for 1,000 years. He's not fated to be with you." Chapter 219. Ning Xuema was speechless. She pursed her lips and smiled. "That's hard to say. Maybe he's already reincarnated. Maybe we're fated to meet in this life." Jiuzun's blue eyes darkened slightly as he looked at her, as if trying to see something through her. A hint of contemplation flashed through his eyes. "Don't you like tall and strong men?" He hadn't forgotten that she had almost kissed that muscular man in her nightmare, and she'd even taken the initiative. Ning Xuema sighed. "There are too few men like my idol in this era. I can't be an old lady in the future, so I can only settle for the next best thing. Actually, although this prince looks a little feminine, he still looks quite manly. If he's reincarnated, he'll definitely still look like this." "Stop dreaming." Jiuzun interrupted her rudely. "Souls are formless. Every time they're reincarnated, they'll look like their parents in the present world. Not to mention that his soul has already dispersed and can't be reincarnated. Even if he's reincarnated due to some special karma, his appearance will still change. He won't look like what you see now." Ning Xuema's eyes curved like crescent moons. She suddenly raised a hand to pat his head. Jiozun, I couldn't tell that a brat like you knows so much. Being with you has really broadened my horizons. His hair was so smooth. It was smoother than the hair of the shampoo advertisement girls. It felt so good to touch. Jiozun obviously didn't expect her to touch him again. He didn't avoid it and was touched on the head by her small hand. He was speechless. This small body was really inconvenient. It hadn't even been a day and he'd already been taken advantage of by her. With a single step, he was already 10 feet away from her. His voice was icy. Touch me again and this Zun will chop off your hand. His words were full of threat. If it were any other time, it would be enough to scare everyone into silence. But now, his voice was crisp and childish. Not only did it not scare Ning Xuemo, it made her laugh instead. What was worse was that as soon as he finished his threat, he was tripped by something. He staggered and almost flew out. Of course, his reaction was extremely fast. He took advantage of the momentum and somersaulted in the air. When he landed on the ground again, he was already standing firm. Ning Xuemo clapped her hands and laughed. Jiozun's skills are amazing. This somersault was beautiful. Jiozun, he suddenly raised his hand and a white light flashed towards Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but tumbled 3 times like a windmill. When she landed, she tripped over something and almost fell flat on her face. Your somersaults aren't bad, but your lower body isn't stable. You still need more practice. Stay in the horse stance for an hour. Jiozun sat down cross-legged. And Ning Xuemo's legs didn't seem to be her own. She actually automatically got into a horse stance, and her posture was very standard. Ning Xuemo, her body stiffened, as if she had suddenly turned into a block of wood. Only her eyes could still move. This little fellow was also one to take revenge for the smallest grievance. She wasn't the one who tripped him up. She had only seen a small joke and he was already taking his revenge. Her head couldn't move and Jiozun was sitting not far behind her. She couldn't see what he was doing. Ning Xuemo wasn't in a hurry. There were only the 2 of them in this place. In this unknown environment, they were each other's companions. He wouldn't leave her alone. Chapter 220. Ning Xuemo was not in a hurry. There were only the 2 of them in this place. In such an unknown environment, they were each other's companions. He would not leave her behind and leave her alone. Besides, this place was not suitable for staying for too long. Even if he punished her by squatting in the horse stance, it would not be for too long. Usually, she would do the horse stance to practice her lower body. Now, she would just treat it as practice. She closed her eyes and quietly adjusted her breathing. Then, she realized that the strange energy in her body had grown stronger. It flowed slowly in her body, as comfortable as a mountain stream. This should be psychokinesis. She finally had her own psychokinesis. She knew that her dantian was the place that devoured all psychokinesis, so she purposely prevented her psychokinesis from passing through that place, only circling around other places. Then, she discovered something that surprised her. She had taken many risks along the way and suffered many external wounds. Although she had already treated them, the days were too short. Those wounds still hurt from time to time, and some of them were even cracked open. However, after the psychokinesis flowed through these places, the wounds healed at an amazing speed. Although she could not see it, she could feel the strange itchiness when the wounds healed. It was as if she had been cast the rejuvenation spell in the game. She circulated the psychokinesis in her body once before opening her eyes. She did not know how long she had been squatting here, but she could clearly feel the numbness and pain in her legs. Yet, she could not move. Hey, Jiozun, have you had enough? Undo it for me. Ning Xuemo could still move her mouth. She finally could not help but speak. There was no movement behind her. I know you're behind me. Alright, undo it for me now. Can I apologize to you? Since the hard way did not work, she tried the soft way. Still, there was no movement. She paused for a moment and listened attentively. Her surroundings were as quiet as an ancient tomb. There was no sound at all. She could not even hear his breathing. That little bastard would not leave her behind and run away, would he? Plop. A drop of something dripped onto her head. Only then did she realize that there was something heavy on the top of her head. After the liquid dripped onto her head, it did not roll down her head. Ning Xuemo recalled the various stone statues in the corridor, and the hairs on his back almost stood up. These stone statues were like the stalactites that we often see. They were formed by the liquid dripping from the cave over the years and gradually petrified. That should be the liquid that dripped onto her head. She was a little flustered and couldn't help but shout a few more times. Soft, hard, begging for mercy, threatening, she said all kinds of things, but to no avail. There was still no movement around her. It was as if Jiao Zun had really left and no longer cared about her. She became more and more alarmed. Since she couldn't call for outside help, she thought of ways to rely on herself. She began to use her psychokinesis to attack the sealed area. However, this Jiao Zun's method of restraint was obviously different from acupuncture. Her efforts were futile. Her body still could not move, but more and more liquid dripped onto her head. She felt as if there was a steel helmet on her head, and it was getting heavier and heavier. A drop of liquid was dripping onto the tip of her nose. She then realized in horror that the liquid was no longer flowing down, but had solidified there. If this continued, her facial features would soon be sealed. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before she would also become a stone statue and suffocate to death. Chapter 221. Jiao Zun, you pervert. Lousy curses you to never grow up again. Forever a little brat. Ning Xuemo finally couldn't help but curse. What did you say? There was finally some movement behind her. A small figure slowly turned in front of her, a pair of blue eyes looking at her indifferently. So he hadn't left. So he had been behind her all along. Apologize. Apologize and Benzin will let you go. Jiao Zun's expression was even calmer. His complexion looked much better than before, his originally pale face now having an apple-like blush. It seemed that the meditation earlier had helped him recover quite a bit. After being together for so long, he had a general understanding of her personality. He thought that she would stubbornly say no, but he didn't expect her to smile and say, I'm sorry. The most important requirement of being a secret agent was to be able to judge the situation, to know when to yield and when to stand tall. Her words were straightforward, but there was also a faint sense of alienation. Jiao Zun's eyes flashed as he looked at her expression for a moment. Ning Xuemo remained calm. Jiao Zun, I've already apologized as you wished. Can you let me go now? Jiao Zun raised his sleeve and Ning Xuemo's body heated up. She finally regained her freedom. She moved her stiff limbs, waiting for the numbness in her legs to subside before taking large strides forward. The young lady finally stopped talking so much. Satisfied, Jiao Zun followed behind her easily. This tunnel was actually longer than it had ever been. The two of them walked at a rather fast pace, walking for about 4 hours without seeing the end. It really did feel like they were walking in intestines, with all the twists and turns. Other than the various stone statues they had seen at the beginning, there was nothing else. When they reached the depths, there weren't even any stone statues. Ning Xuemo was very quiet along the way, not saying a word. Only the sound of their footsteps could be heard in the tunnel. Jiuzun raised his head to look at Ning Xuemo, who was taking large strides forward, with a complicated expression in his eyes. He had always liked peace and quiet. His disciples were all focused in front of him, not daring to utter a single word. His days were like a pool of water, calm and without ripples. But ever since he met her, his peaceful pace had been completely disrupted. She was a talkative person. Because she didn't know his identity, she spoke to him impolitely, willfully. She joked with him, even flirted with him. He wasn't used to it, but he felt that it was tolerable. When she was chattering away, he hated that she was making so much noise that he wanted to seal her mouth with a spell. But now that she had suddenly quieted down, he felt that something was missing. How did you get to the 9th summit? For the first time, he took the initiative to talk to her. A bird brought it up. This time, it was her turn to be a woman of few words. No wonder a rookie like her was able to come to the 9th summit. It was really a coincidence. You were brought up here as food. You survived and your friend was swallowed by a bird. Jiuzun's ability to analyze and deduce was obviously very strong as well. Once he connected the dots, he could more or less deduce the cause and effect. This time, she only replied with one word. When we fell down just now, the monkey-like thing you encountered was the stone roar. It and the stone essence complement each other. Wherever it is, the stone essence will usually appear. Sometimes, it will even attract prey for the stone essence. Jiuzun began to explain to her why he didn't let her get close to the stone wall just now. Oh. His long explanation was only met with a nasal sound from her. Chapter 222. Jiuzun was obviously not someone who was good at leading the conversation. Since Ning Xuemo was a woman of few words, he stopped talking as well. The tunnel was silent again. They walked another 7 to 8 li before a ball of white light suddenly appeared in front of them. The two of them had been walking in the blue environment for so long that they were already tired of the view. Seeing this ball of light now, their spirits were lifted. Jiuzun was still able to maintain his composure, but Ning Xuemo cheered and ran towards the ball of white light. Oh. Skylight. God, as she was finally coming out. God knew that she was going to go crazy in this blue place. She was still cautious, slowing down when she got close to the white light. She only ran out when she was sure that it was a cave entrance. However, she stopped abruptly when she saw the scenery outside. She had indeed run out of the cave entrance, but it was not the sky outside that she had imagined. It was an extremely large space, 8 times bigger than the capital stadium. In the middle of this vast space, there was a large tree with luxuriant leaves. Ning Xuemo had never seen such a thick and huge tree. Dozens of people might not be able to wrap their arms around it. The tree bark was wrinkled, like the wrinkles of an old man. Compared to its diameter, the tree was not too tall, only 20 to 30 meters tall. Its leaves danced, and its huge crown almost covered the entire space. What surprised Ning Xuemo was not this, but the fruits that occasionally appeared between the leaves. Ginseng fruit. Ginseng fruit. Ginseng fruit. The moment she saw the fruit clearly, only these 3 words were left in her mind. The fruits on the tree were almost exactly the same as the ginseng fruit in the Wuzhuangguan described in Journey to the West. The fruits were like little children meditating. They had fair skin, smiling facial features, and all 4 limbs. Their small bodies were chubby, the size of a large pear, appearing and disappearing between the leaves of the tree. Who would have thought that such things really existed in this world? She had struck gold. She had really struck gold. There was such a treasure in the stone spirit's stomach. Ning Xuemo's eyes narrowed into crescents. Jozun, this is your nest, right? So many of your kind. Because of her joy, Ning Xuemo was finally willing to speak to Jozun again. Jozun, he looked at the ginseng fruit on the tree, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Hearing Ning Xuemo's words, he pursed his lips and said, "This is a ginseng fruit." I know. Ginseng fruit and ginseng baby are similar. Ning Xuemo hopped forward and counted the fruits through the gaps between the leaves. 1, 2, 3, 8. She spent a great deal of effort to finish counting before turning to look at Jozun. Her bright eyes were filled with surprise. A total of 8 fruits. Jozun, you're Jo. Are you sure they're not your brothers? Jozun. This sovereign said, no. That's good. Ning Xuemo was already preparing to climb the tree to pluck the fruits. Jozun, do you have any golden striker? She remembered that in Journey to the West, it was said that picking this kind of fruit could only be done with a golden tool. Other tools would not work. No. Jozun was also looking at the fruit on the tree. This was the first time he had seen it. Since he had come across it, how could he let it go? What do you need a golden striker for? Jozun looked at Ning Xuemo, who was rolling up her sleeves and preparing to climb the tree, feeling a little puzzled. The corner of Ning Xuemo's mouth lifted slightly. She didn't answer his question. Instead, she nimbly adjusted her body and jumped onto the tree trunk. Chapter 223. When it came to climbing trees, if she claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. Unexpectedly, just as her feet touched the tree trunk, the sturdy-looking tree bark suddenly caved in. Ning Xuemo was caught off guard and her feet immediately sank into it. She was shocked and wanted to pull her feet out, but they seemed to be stuck to something and she couldn't exert any strength. Instead, she felt like she had fallen into a quagmire, sinking deeper and deeper. Could this ginseng fruit tree be a man-eating tree? Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed. She wanted to eat its fruit, not be eaten by it. Her feet sank in at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ning Xuemo didn't dare to delay, pulling out her dagger and stabbing it into the tree trunk. Pfft! Her dagger seemed to have fallen into a quagmire as it sank into the tree trunk, unable to be pulled out. The tree trunk ate the dagger even faster, reaching the hilt in the blink of an eye. If Ning Xuemo didn't let go, her hand would be swallowed as well. She could only let go and watch as the dagger that had contributed so much to her adventure sank into the tree trunk, disappearing without a trace. The place where the dagger had been stabbed returned to its original state, not even leaving a scar on the tree bark. Wasn't metal supposed to subdue wood? Why had her millennium cold steel been swallowed by wood? At this moment, her feet were completely submerged in the tree trunk and it was swallowing her calves. The place where she had been swallowed hurt like a knife, as if there were countless little mouths biting inside. She was suspended in the air, with no way to escape. Everything happened very quickly. From the moment Ning Xuemo climbed up to the moment she fell into the tree, only a dozen seconds had passed. The ginseng fruit tree was actually a man-eating tree. This was too much. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but look at Jozun. Would he save her? Did he have a way to save her? Jozun had come to the tree the moment she fell into the tree. His expression was solemn as his small hands emitted rays of light that blasted towards the large tree trunk. The power of his attacks had always been strong. Not to mention a large tree, even an iron tree of the same thickness could be broken by his attack. But now, it was useless. The trunk of the tree ate everything it saw, even the light he emitted. The different colored light collided with the trunk and disappeared. It was useless. With this slight delay, Ning Xuemo's calf had already sunk in. It was too late. Ning Xuema steeled herself and shouted, "Jiuzun, cut off my legs." Jiuzun's palms paused for a moment as he ignored her. His palms continued to emit the light of different spells as he continued to hack at the tree trunk. However, it was still useless. Ning Xuema was anxious. She saw that her knees were about to sink in. If she didn't make a decision, she was afraid that even her thighs couldn't be saved. Her body suddenly rolled up, and her palms were like knives, fiercely cutting off her own legs. At this critical moment, she could only break her leg to save her life. Wait! A ray of white light intercepted, blocking Ning Xuema's palms. Ning Xuema lowered her head, her eyes blazing as she looked at Jiuzun under the tree. "I don't want to be crippled, but I don't want to die. With Benson here, I won't let you lose an arm or a leg." Jiuzun's reply was simple as he suddenly punched the tree. Ning Xuema's heart almost jumped out of her chest. "Hey, don't touch the tree. It'll eat your fist." Before she could finish her sentence, Jiuzun's small fist had already struck the tree trunk. Ning Xuema didn't know how strong Jiuzun's small fist was. Chapter 224. Ning Xuema didn't know how strong Jiuzun's small fists were. She only knew that after the ginseng tree was struck by Jiuzun's small fists, it shook as if it had been struck by lightning. Bright red juice seeped out from under the tree bark like blood. It was so huge that its shaking caused the ground to tremble as if there was an earthquake. A shrill cry that sounded like both laughter and crying came from the depths of the tree, piercing to the ears. Ning Xuema's legs were finally spat out by the tree trunk, and she fell from the tree head first. Because the distance was too short, Ning Xuema didn't have time to adjust her body. She closed her eyes and gathered her strength above her head, preparing to crash into the tree head-on. A gentle force wrapped around her waist, and just as her body was about to hit the ground, she was forcefully turned around. Ning Xuema staggered as her feet finally touched the ground. Then, her body tilted and fell to the side. Although the area below her calf that had been swallowed by the tree was still there, she couldn't feel anything. Her body didn't hit the ground, but fell into someone's embrace. Ning Xuema opened her eyes and was stunned. Her upper body was resting on Jiuzun's small shoulders. Compared to his small body, her originally small and delicate body seemed incomparably large in his embrace. This scene was too much for her to comprehend. Ning Xuema wanted to flip over and land on the ground, but the trembling ground beneath her feet suddenly spat out countless long tree roots. Those tree roots seemed to have come alive as they swept towards the two of them. Jiuzun picked her up and sprinted towards the entrance of the cave. The difference in their figures was too great. If Ning Xuema were to carry him and run, it wouldn't be strange at all. But now, he was the one carrying her. It was like a little mouse dragging a shovel, with the big head behind. Luckily, he was fast and his feet didn't touch the ground. Ning Xuema's body that was suspended in the air was pulled up like a flag fluttering in the wind. Behind them, countless tree roots danced like giant snakes as they chased after the two of them like landslides and tsunamis. Fortunately, Jiuzun's speed was fast and he had many ways to deal with them. Often, when they were about to be caught, he would throw out a few rays of light. Although they couldn't sever the roots, they could still obstruct them slightly. Finally, the two of them returned to the original passageway. Those tree roots seemed to have some misgivings about this passageway. They danced and circled outside the passageway for a while before burrowing back into the ground. Slowly, peace was restored. Ning Xuema sat at the entrance of the cave. Seeing the tree trunks return to normal, she let out a sigh of relief. Only then did she have time to look at her own legs. The moment she saw them clearly, even though she was used to seeing the world, she still couldn't help but shiver. The area below her knees that had been swallowed by the tree was now covered with countless roots that were as thin as a cow's hair. They were so dense that it was as if she was covered with an inch of hair, or as if she was wearing a pair of thick leather boots. Those fine roots were still automatically drilling into her legs. Now that she had regained a bit of feeling in her legs, it was painful and itchy, making her want to jump up and cut off her legs. God, what kind of monster is this? Ning Xuema couldn't help but reach out to pull them off. Don't move. Jiao Zun reached out to stop her, his eyes fixed on those roots. You won't be able to pull them off. Instead, they'll drill into your hands. Then what should I do? Ning Xuema felt her hair stand on end. I'll think of something. Jiao Zun pressed down on her thighs, stopping her from moving. Chapter 225. I'll think of something. Jiao Zun pressed down on her thighs, stopping her from moving. Ning Xuema sucked in a breath, suppressing the panic in her heart as she steadied herself. All right. I won't move. Jiao Zun glanced at her again, admiration flashing through his eyes. If it were any other girl, they would have screamed long ago in such a situation, but she was able to calm down so quickly. It was not simple at all. This girl looked lively, but when it was time to be calm, she could be calmer than anyone else. Smart, wise, lively, calm, cunning, and merciless, these traits were contradictory, but they were perfectly combined in her. Jiao Zun took out a snow-white embroidered pouch from his sleeve, taking out several items from it. There was a small jade gourd, a silver knife, silver scissors, and some talismans. After putting these things away, he pressed his hands on her thighs and looked at her again. It hurts a little. Bear with it. His small hands were soft, but for some reason, they gave people a kind of strength that was as stable as a mountain, calming people's hearts. Ning Xuema's forehead was already covered in sweat from the intense pain in her legs, but she forced herself to smile. Do as you wish, I can take it. Jiao Zun nodded. After some thought, he stuffed something into her hands. Bite this. Ning Xuema looked at it. It was a top-grade jade pendant, in the shape of a phoenix stepping on a branch. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and whether it was the bird or the branches under its claws, they were all very lifelike. This Jiao Zun was so casually giving away a treasure. If such a large piece of top-grade jade was brought back to the modern world, it would be worth millions. Yet, he had casually taken it out for her to bite on. It was obvious that he was afraid that she would bite her tongue from the pain when he cast his spell later. Ning Xuema glanced at the jade pendant again, her heart skipping a beat. A jade pendant in the shape of a phoenix stepping on a branch, did it represent Iching-1? She pushed it away without batting an eyelid. It's fine, I can take it. This jade pendant is too valuable, I'll break it if I bite it. Jiao Zun looked at her strangely. Is your tongue more valuable or the jade pendant more valuable? Bite it. Alright, you're the one who asked me to bite you. Don't feel bad when I bite you. Ning Xuema held the jade pendant in her mouth. Just as she bit down, she felt a sudden pain in her thigh. It was as if two awls had drilled into the air. Following that, she felt a burning pain in her calves and feet, as if she had been skinned alive. The roots, as thin as a cow's hair, were finally shaken out and flew into the air. Jiao Zun's movements were as fast as lightning. With a wave of his sleeves, a ball of fire enveloped the thin roots, burning them clean in the blink of an eye. Not a single one escaped. Ning Xuema didn't scream, but the jade pendant in her mouth was bitten into two halves by her and fell to the ground. The ground beneath his feet was stone slabs. The two halves of the jade pendant fell to the ground and broke into four halves. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him and said, I didn't do it on purpose. Jiuzun glanced at the jade pendant on the ground, then looked at her watery eyes. It's fine. Then, he looked at her small teeth and said, your teeth are quite hard. You didn't break them, did you? It seems like he doesn't care. Ning Xuemo let out a sigh of relief and shook her head. My teeth are fine. Her legs were still burning with pain. She hurriedly looked at her legs and her face darkened. She was about to cry. There's something wrong with my legs. Not a single one of the roots on her legs was left. Chapter 226. The roots on her legs were indeed gone, but her originally beautiful legs and feet were now covered in blood, and the skin on them was gone. Ning Xuemo herself was a doctor. Her medical skills were brilliant, but even she had no way to restore such a large patch of skin. This kind of injury could only be treated with skin grafting, but where was she going to get such a large patch of skin? She couldn't bear to cut it anywhere. If she looked like this in the future, her legs and feet would never be able to see anyone again. Ning Xuemo instantly felt the malice of this world. There's no problem with your bones. You won't have any problems moving in the future. Jiuzun's focus was obviously different from hers. He took the small bottle beside him, intending to apply medicine for her. This medicine is quite effective at relieving pain. It'll suppress your pain for now. Ning Xuemo reached out to grab his wrist, stopping him from continuing. She looked at him anxiously. Jiuzun, does this medicine of yours have the effect of hastening the growth of skin? You're very capable, so you should have some methods to grow skin and restore it to its original state, right? This person should be omnipotent, right? Right? No. Jiuzun snatched his wrist back. This medicine can stop the pain. Even he couldn't restore her skin. Ning Xuemo was instantly powerless, her face falling. She didn't have any other problems, but she loved to be beautiful. She could endure bone-piercing pain, but she couldn't accept not being beautiful anymore. She looked at her bloody feet, her brows furrowed as if she was mourning the death of her parents. It was Jiuzun's first time seeing her like this. He had never seen her so listless even when her life was hanging by a thread. He looked at her legs and pursed his lips, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. Ning Xuemo was used to observing people's expressions. She immediately looked at him. What do you want to say? Is there a way? But it's not easy. Jiuzun said faintly, Qilin armor and Qilin saliva can restore damaged skin to its original state, but it has to be used within 3 days of the injury. Otherwise, it won't be effective. Qilins are divine beasts, and they aren't easy to find in this continent. Ning Xuemo's eyes, which originally had some brilliance, dimmed down. Qilin, in her own era, it was just a legend. It was an extremely rare existence on this continent. If even the Almighty Nine Supremes had said that it would be difficult to find her, then the chances were even slimmer. Her legs were destined to be so ugly that she would never be able to see anyone. I can heal her legs, but you have to take me out of here. A voice suddenly sounded from outside the cave. The voice was a little strange. It sounded like a parrot repeating its words, and it was the voice of a child. Who is it? Ning Xuemo looked up. There were other people here. The cave entrance darkened slightly as a little monster walked in. The reason why it was called a little weirdo was because it wasn't that big. It wasn't much taller than Jiuzun. She was naked, with only a few leaves covering the vital parts of her waist. His skin was ocean blue, and the joints of his hands and feet were densely covered with blue crystal-like scales. He had a pair of large, watery eyes, short ocean blue hair, and 2 horns on his head. When Ning Xuemo saw him for the first time, the image of the little dragon man that she had seen when she was a child flashed through her mind. What kind of animal was this? had it cultivated into a spirit. It looked so cute. Especially that pair of eyes, and those beautiful double eyelids. Chapter 227. The little fellow held its head high, trying its best to make itself look more dignified and lofty. You guys are taking advantage of this condition. You'll definitely agree to it. You are. Ning Xuema's eyes landed on the scales on his body. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Mythical Qilin. You're smart. It's this god. The little fellow's chin was raised even higher. Before it could finish its sentence, a white light enveloped it. It couldn't help but shriek. After the white light faded, the little weirdo was gone. What stood in its place was a Qilin beast. It looked similar to the Qilin that Ning Xuema had seen on the computer, except that it wasn't as big as the legend said. It was only the size of a small pony, and its blue scales shone like crystals. It glared at Jiao Zun angrily. You plotted against me. Jiao Zun looked at it, nonchalant. Are you going to offer up the scales yourself, or is this god going to pluck them out personally? I've said it before. You guys have to bring me out before I'll consider giving you the scales. Kirin's eyes widened. This god will not agree to any of your conditions. Jiao Zun was a man of action. Before he could finish his sentence, the yellow light from his palm had already enveloped Kirin once again. Let this god take them out personally. Kirin was obviously no match for this Jiao Zun. Its body was restrained by the yellow light and it could barely move. Seeing Jiao Zun slowly walking towards it with the intention of plucking its scales, Kirin panicked. Finally, it opened its mouth unwillingly. I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself. Humans were too cunning. Too ruthless. Mother, I want to go home. Kirin was in tears. It didn't dare let anyone pluck its scales. If it wasn't done properly, its vitality would be damaged. Ning Xuema glanced at Jiao Zun. This brat was so young, but he was still so domineering. She looked at Kirin again. Wasn't a Qilin a mythical beast that was majestic in legends? Why was it so small? It wasn't very capable either, but it was subdued by Jiao Zun in just a single exchange. Kirin finally peeled off a scale from its forelimb. It seemed to be very uncomfortable. It was so painful that its horns were trembling. Jiao Zun took it and weighed it in his palm. The Qilin tablet then curled up into a small ball the size of a fingernail. It looked like a blue pearl as he passed it to Ning Xuema. Swallow it. Ning Xuema naturally had no objections and swallowed the bead. It was cool and slightly sweet as it slid down his throat. It was as if a cool stream of water had flowed down his stomach. It was indescribably comfortable. Under Jiao Zun's guidance, she once again channeled the MF within her to activate the pearl, pushing the nutrients from the pearl towards her legs. About an hour later, Ning Xuema woke up from her meditation. The first thing she did when she opened her eyes was to check her legs. The moment she saw her own legs, her eyes lit up. Amazing! It was too miraculous. Her legs had been bloody and unsightly just a moment ago, but now, they had recovered to their former fair and tender state. This body originally had a pair of beautiful feet. Now, the skin on them had completely healed. Perhaps it was because the Qilin tablet had nourished them, but the skin was even more translucent than before. The calluses and blisters that had formed on the soles of her feet due to the continuous journey had also disappeared. Her feet were perfect, like half moons. Her nails were round and pink, like light pink pearls. Her entire feet looked like they were carved out of white jade. One couldn't help but want to touch them. Chapter 228. Even Kirin's large eyes were staring at her feet. So pretty. It stuck out its tongue, looking like it wanted to lick them. Jiozun shifted his gaze away from her feet and stood up, intentionally blocking Kirin's gaze. Since you've recovered, put on your shoes and get up. Ning Xuema had an innocent look on her face. My shoes and socks were all swallowed by that stupid tree. I don't have any shoes to wear. Jiozun paused. Wait here. He turned and walked out. Ning Xuema looked at his small back and couldn't help but rub her nose. This little fellow looked like a child, but his actions and words were all adult. His every action carried the innate aura of a venerable. Where was he going to get her shoes? There was only a ginseng fruit tree and some weeds here. Was he going to weave a pair of straw sandals for her? Forget it, she didn't need to worry about this problem. This little fellow looked like he had a lot of ideas. She just needed to wait for him to get her shoes to wear. When Ning Xuema was on a mission, although she was the one who came up with the big and small plans, she didn't really do much in daily life. For example, barbecuing wild animals or preparing some daily necessities were all done by her subordinates. In this aspect, she was still very good at stretching out her hands and opening her mouth for food. Therefore, she didn't feel uncomfortable being served by others. The only thing she wasn't used to was being served by such a small child. From this point, she felt like she was destroying the future of her motherland. But when she thought of his identity, a ginseng child, she calmed down. She was a little bored sitting there, so she looked at her feet again. She was quite satisfied with this pair of feet. In ancient times, a woman's feet were her second face. Although women in this era didn't have to bind their feet, they were still small and delicate, making them more pleasing to the eye. When she looked up, she saw that Kirin had turned back into a little blue person. It was still standing there, its eyes still looking at Ning Xuema's feet. She didn't know what it was thinking. Ning Xuema lifted her foot generously. Does it look good? Kirin was an honest person. He nodded and answered without hesitation, yes. Ning Xuema smiled with satisfaction. She looked at Kirin from head to toe. It looked a little uneasy, and a little timid, like a real child, a lost child. Ning Xuema realized that she had been quite lucky with children recently. The Jiozun she met was a child, and now, the Qilin she met was also a child. However, other than his appearance, Jiozun didn't look like a child at all. The aura around him was also becoming more and more shocking. On the other hand, Kirin was really like a child. He looked like a 5 or 6-year-old, but his intelligence and temperament were like that of a 7 or 8-year-old. Ning Xuema looked at it and felt pity for it. She started to chat with it. While chatting, Ning Xuema learned that this little Qilin wasn't a native of this place. It came from the mysterious Qilin clan. 1,000 years ago, because it was looking for a spiritual medicine, it was accidentally swallowed by a stone essence. Since then, it had been trapped here, unable to leave. It also said that there was another person who was swallowed at the same time as it. That person had the same goal as it, which was to find the ginseng fruit. Therefore, they had traveled together at that time. When the stone essence swallowed them, it was that person who protected it, preventing it from being hurt by the sky-splitting wind at the entrance. However, that person fell into a deep sleep after coming in. No matter how it called out to him, or even bit him, he didn't wake up. Instead, his breath became weaker and weaker until it finally stopped breathing. Chapter 229. It had been trapped in this place for thousands of years and had not seen any living creatures. Its life had been as lonely as snow. It was about to go crazy from boredom. You will take me out, right? I also have a lot of skills, so I won't be a burden to you. After the little fellow finished his story, he anxiously looked at Ning Xuema. His pair of big eyes clearly expressed his desire. It thought that Ning Xuemo should be easy to talk to since she was smiling and had a good temper, so it took the opportunity to ask for help. Ning Xuemo looked at it with her arms around her knees. What skills do you have? I can transfer water from mountains and lakes at any time, I can make withered trees flourish and grow again at any time, I can command groups of beasts. The little Qilin counted with its fingers and tried its best to promote itself. Ning Xuemo's eyes flickered. She obviously did not believe it. Command beasts? You? Of course. I may be small, but Kirin is the king of all beasts. Why do I remember that the king of all beasts is a tiger? Ning Xuemo interrupted it. A tiger is nothing. Kirin's tone was obviously disdainful. It doesn't deserve to lick my fur. It is only the king of mountains and forests in the mortal world. Kirin is the king of all beasts, and I can understand all the beasts' language. Ning Xuemo's eyes lit up. That was a good skill. She yawned lazily. Your skills are only useful when you get out of here. They are useless in this stone spirit's stomach. There are no beasts here, and no withered trees waiting for you to nourish them. She suddenly thought of something. There is no food here. How do you survive? Kirin was stunned. It looked at the ginseng fruit tree outside. I eat its leaves. Kirin is a herbivore. Ning Xuemo was surprised. She looked at the fruit on the tree again. Why don't you eat the fruit? It doesn't give me any. Kirin sounded a little indignant. I gave it so much water, but it refused to give me a single fruit. It turns out that you and the ginseng fruit tree are helping each other. Ning Xuemo suddenly realized and changed the topic. It turns out that you are the accomplice of this stupid fruit tree. No, of course not. I didn't do anything for it. I just watered it. It only gave me one leaf a day. It's so stingy. Kirin shook his hand. Then why don't you pick it yourself? Aren't you here to look for fruits? I stole it. Kirin's voice grew softer. I was hung on a tree for 10 days. It turned out that Kirin had also suffered greatly from this demonic tree. It was probably because it saw that the demonic tree was somewhat useful. Otherwise, Kirin might have become its fertilizer. The ginseng fruit is an immortal fruit, so its leaves must be treasures as well. It must be very useful for you to eat it. It will be beneficial to your cultivation. Ning Xuemo comforted him. It's useless. It's completely useless. Its leaves can barely fill my stomach. They can't increase my immortal power at all. I've been here for 1,000 years, but my cultivation hasn't increased. Instead, it has regressed. Kirin was very resentful when he said this. So it was like this. The ginseng fruit wasn't as amazing as the rumors said. Ning Xuemo felt that her worldview had been refreshed. Perhaps its essence is concentrated in the fruit, so everything else is trash. Ning Xuemo deduced that poor Kirin had actually eaten trash for 1,000 years. The fruit doesn't have any essence. Jiu Zun's voice came from the cave. Chapter 230. The fruit doesn't have any essence either. Jiu Zun's voice came from the cave. A white shadow flashed as he stepped in, tossing a pair of shoes to Ning Xuemo's feet. Put them on. The shoes were green and the style was ordinary. They didn't look like something Jiu Zun could bring out. Although Ning Xuemo wasn't too satisfied with this pair of shoes, it was still better than nothing. When she wore them on her feet, the size was just right, as if they were made according to her measurements. They fit her perfectly and were comfortable to wear. Ning Xuemo felt like she was stepping on soft grass when she wore them. Jiu Zun, where did you get these shoes from? Ning Xuema walked a few steps on the ground. The more she walked, the more comfortable she felt. They were several times more comfortable than the brocade shoes she used to wear. We can't stay here for long. Let's go. Jiuzun didn't answer her question, turning to walk out of the cave. Ning Xuema followed him out. You found the way out. More or less. Ning Xuema's eyes brightened. She asked excitedly, where is the exit? Kirin, who was following behind them, also opened his eyes wide, staring at Jiuzun. He had been trapped here for so long and had already gone through all the nooks and crannies here. He hadn't even found a hole as big as a mouse hole, much less one that led to the exit. Other than the tunnel they came from and this large empty space, there was no other space inside the stone spirit. There was no exit at the end of the tunnel they had fallen into. In these 1,000 years, Kirin had gone through these places more than 1,000 times. This stone spirit was like a mythical beast that only allowed entry and not exit. Jiuzun's gaze fell on Kirin. Little Qilin's height was obviously taller than him by half a head, but its imposing manner was completely suppressed by him. Jiuzun's gaze was as cold as ice, causing Kirin to shiver. He couldn't help but shrink back and hide behind Ning Xuema. His small hand grabbed onto her clothes, not daring to show his face. Come out. Jiuzun frowned slightly. This was obviously directed at Kirin. Kirin trembled again. She timidly peeked out half of her face from behind Ning Xuema. WH. What are you doing? Since you're a divine beast, you should act like one. Why are you acting so cowardly? Come out, stand up straight and speak. Jiuzun reprimanded the moment he opened his mouth, his aura growing stronger. Kirin was really afraid of Ning Xuema. He really didn't want to come out, but he didn't dare not to. However, he was only 2 feet away from Ning Xuema. He even held the corner of Ning Xuema's clothes in his little hand, like a frightened child holding his mother's hand. What on earth do you want? You want to go out with us? Kirin nodded vigorously. Of course, of course. 10 years. Jiuzun spat out the 2 words slowly. Ha! Kirin's eyes widened in confusion. Listen to my orders for 10 years. If you agree, I will bring you out. In other words, Kirin had to be his summoned beast for 10 years. 10 years later, he would regain his freedom. Kirin's little blue face flushed red. We Kirins are divine beasts. We won't listen to any human. You're ambitious. Jiuzun praised him lightly. Then you can continue eating leaves here. He tugged at Ning Xuema's hand. Let's go. The 2 of them strode forward. Kirin was stunned for a moment before she pursed her lips and followed closely behind Ning Xuema. She had obviously made up her mind to follow them out. Ning Xuema was holding a strong little bean in her left hand, while a blue-skinned little bean was following behind her. Looking at herself, she found it rather funny. Chapter 231. The 2 in front of her were obviously much older than her, but she looked the most like an adult, like a big sister taking her 2 younger brothers out for a stroll. They hadn't taken more than a few steps when Jiuzun suddenly waved his sleeve behind him. A pale yellow light flashed and Kirin's legs seemed to have been tied up in an instant, unable to move at all. He was shocked as he watched the 2 walk further and further away. He couldn't help but panic. Hey, you can't trick me. There was already a sob in his voice. He didn't want to stay here alone anymore. He wanted to get out. After we get out, your bindings will be released. Jiuzun didn't even turn back. Kirin was really panicking now. He had the mentality of a child and couldn't help but cry. You bully me, woo woo woo. His cries were very loud, almost heart-wrenching, making one's heart ache when they heard it. Ning Xuema wasn't a soft-hearted person, but when she heard the child's cries, she felt an indescribable sadness in her heart. Her pity for the little divine beast grew even stronger. She was about to open her mouth when Jiao Zun gripped her hand tightly. He then indifferently said, "Crying is a coward's behavior. It won't solve anything." Seeing the two walk further and further away, Kirin finally relented. I promise you. Bring me out." Following his words, the strange bindings on his legs were finally released. He ran to catch up to the two, grabbing onto Ning Xuema's clothes as if he was afraid of being abandoned. He tried to bargain with Jiao Zun timidly. I'll listen to her, okay?" Jiao Zun was speechless. His face stiffened. "Your personality isn't suitable to follow her. She can't train you." Hey! Ning Xuema crossed her arms and looked at Jiao Zun with a half-smile. "How do you know I can't train him? Even a Tibetan Mastiff would be tamed in Jin's hands." She used to have 2 Tibetan Mastiffs in her little villa. They were fierce and wild to outsiders, but they were like big cats in front of her. "I will listen to this little sister's words. I will protect her." The little Qilin also promptly responded. "It's settled then. Let him stay by my side." Ning Xuema held Kirin's little green hand and said in a firm tone. Jiao Zun raised his head to look at her. "Are you sure you can train it? You know the Qilin's habits. Are you sure you won't train him into an obedient cat? His habits can be slowly grasped. I will train him into a real divine beast." Ning Xuema proudly raised her head, full of confidence. Jiao Zun pondered for a moment before agreeing readily. "All right, but this venerable one has 2 conditions." With a wave of his sleeve, Kirin returned to its original form. "First, it can follow you, but it can't be in its human form. It can only be in its beast form." Kirin, Ning Xuema raised her head and stroked its head. "It's okay. Actually, you look better in your beast form. Your human form is not good." Kirin could only compromise now, not daring to say anything else. A beast form was a beast form. It was fine as long as it could leave this place. At most, it could just change back after leaving. What about the second condition? Ning Xuema looked at Jiao Zun again. "We'll split up immediately after we leave this place. This venerable one will not protect you for another day." Jiao Zun stated his final condition. Ning Xuema's heart sank. Even if they left this time, they would be near the 9th peak. At most, it would be the 8th peak. With her martial arts, she probably wouldn't be able to make it out. Moreover, she had to bring Kirin, this cowardly crybaby, with her. Chapter 232. Furthermore, she had to bring along Kirin, the cowardly crybaby, with her. The future was bleak. She opened her mouth and was about to refuse when the little Qilin beside her hastily said, "Don't worry, the beasts in this mountain are all afraid of me. You don't need him to protect you, I can also send you out safely. Little sister, let me follow you." Ning Xuema's eyes brightened. She had forgotten that Kirin was the king of beasts. Since that was the case, what was there for her to be afraid of? She agreed readily. "All right, your previous promise is void. We'll split up once we get out. You go your own way and I'll go mine." Jiao Zun was speechless. This little girl didn't seem to have any feelings for him. After everything was decided, Ning Xuema and Kirin established a 10-year contract under Jiao Zun's supervision. The contract was unfair. Kirin had to follow Ning Xuema for the next 10 years to ensure her safety. If Ning Xuema were to die in these 10 years, Kirin would die as well. If Kirin were to die first, Ning Xuemo would be fine. Kirin was dissatisfied with such a perverse contract, but under Jiu Zun's pressure, he didn't even have the strength to refute. It was somewhat worried as it looked at Ning Xuemo. This human's strength was too weak. She belonged to the type that could die at any time. Its future was bleak. If he had known this would happen, he would have established a contract with Jiu Zun. Although he was shorter than him, he was quite capable and wouldn't die so easily. He regretted it a little. Ning Xuemo was intelligent and immediately saw the little Qilan's regret. She raised her head and looked at it with a smile that wasn't a smile. I won't force any person or beast to stay by my side. It's not too late for you to regret. You can form a contract with him. He'll treat you well and won't let you lead the way when we're on an adventure. Kirin shuddered. With Jiu Zun's strict personality, he would definitely let him lead the way if they were on an adventure. His abilities were high, and the places he went to would be extremely dangerous. However, this little girl's abilities were average, so she definitely didn't like to take risks. It would be safer to follow her. It immediately used its little claws to grab onto Ning Xuemo's clothes and said firmly, "No, little apple will follow you." Then it completed the contract with Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo didn't know that the Kirin actually had a name until now. What? Little Apple. Who gave it such a trendy name? It was very modern. Who gave you this name? Ning Xuemo asked excitedly. It's said to be my mother. Reportedly. You haven't seen your mother. Kirin shook his head. No. My parents passed away not long after I was born. So she was an orphan. Poor child. Ah, no, poor Kirin. It seemed that mythological beasts were also quite trendy. Maybe it was because it looked like a green apple that its mother was inspired to give her son a nickname. Then how old are you now? Ning Xuemo looked at its pony-like body, instinctively feeling that it was still a young Kirin. Not old. Counting the 1,000 years I've been here, I'm only about 2,000 years old. Ning Xuemo's lips twitched. A 2,000-year-old Kirin was still a young child. Indeed, the age of a mythological beast couldn't be compared to that of a human. The human and beast chatted as they followed Jiu Zun around the ginseng fruit tree. Jiu Zun walked slowly, tossing one or two stalks of grass on the ground from time to time, as if he was doing it on purpose. It looked like he was just tossing them around for fun. Chapter 233. This grass was also the kind of grass that grew in the surroundings. It had emerald green leaves that were about a foot tall, growing here and there in clusters. There was nothing special about it. Ning Xuemo looked at the grass that he had tossed aside, and her heart skipped a beat. She knew formations and could already tell that he hadn't tossed the grass around casually. It seemed like he was setting up a formation without anyone noticing. At this moment, Ning Xuemo and he were on the same boat, so she naturally wouldn't expose him. Wasn't it just them and this Kirin here? Who was he trying to deal with by scheming so much? Her gaze landed on the huge ginseng fruit tree. Was he going to deal with it? She looked at the grass in his hands again and suddenly felt that it looked familiar. She lowered her head to look at her shoes and suddenly realized that her shoes were woven from this grass. These grass-woven shoes were so comfortable to wear. She was going to bring some out and weave a few pairs for herself when she returned. This trip wouldn't have been in vain. She squatted down to pull out the grass. Don't move. Jiu Zun suddenly shouted. Ning Xuemo's hand paused as she touched a blade of grass. This grass looked incomparably soft, but it was actually jagged. With a hiss, a bloody wound appeared on her fair finger. Fresh blood dripped down, and the wound burned with pain. She subconsciously held her injured hand with her other hand, and when she looked at the grass again, her eyes widened. When her blood dripped onto the grass, it actually quickly seeped into it, as if the grass was absorbing it like food. These grasses actually drank blood too. Ning Xuema's finger was still in pain as blood seeped out from between her fingers. In just a short moment, her other hand was actually dyed red. The amount of blood lost was obviously not small. It was only a small cut, so how could there be so much blood? Could it be that the grass was poisonous and destroyed the blood-clotting cells? When Ning Xuema came to the mountains, she had naturally brought all sorts of emergency medicine with her. There were ointments for bruises and even medicine to stop the bleeding. Although her clothes had been disposed of like trash by Jiuzun after last night's adventure, it was a good thing that he had kept her ointment and tools and had returned them to her long ago. They were now nestled in her sleeves. However, both of her hands were covered in blood, so she couldn't reach out to take it. She half-squatted in front of Jiuzun and said, "Come, give me some medicine." She had medicine that specialized in repairing blood-clotting cells, so it was definitely top-notch at stopping bleeding. Jiuzun paused for a moment. He rarely got injured, so he didn't usually carry any ointment with him. Seeing the blood flowing out of her hand so quickly, he used a healing technique but couldn't stop the blood flow. He could only reach into her sleeve to search for the ointment. His hand unavoidably touched her soft arm under her sleeve, and he couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, he quickly took out all the bottles and jars from her sleeve and lined them up on the ground. "Which one?" Ning Xuema pointed at the light red medicine bottle in the middle and said, "This one." Jiuzun picked up the bottle and pulled away her hand that had been covering it, scattering all the powder in the bottle. "Hey, just a little will do." Jiuzun's movements were too fast. Before she could finish her sentence, the bottle had already been emptied. Ning Xuema was speechless. Her heart ached. It was difficult to refine this blood-clotting medicine in this era, and it wasn't easy to make it either. She had only managed to refine half a bottle in 3 days. Actually, just a little bit was enough, but now... Chapter 234. The medicine was indeed effective. Almost as soon as the powder was applied, the blood stopped flowing. Jiuzun looked at the medicine bottle, then at the wound on her hand. He nodded. "This medicine is not bad. Where did you get it?" Ning Xuema weakly replied, "It's just something I refine myself." "You know how to refine medicine?" He thought that she was only slightly more skilled in medicine. He had seen her treat the wound with his own eyes. Her technique was very nimble. "Of course," Ning Xuema replied. She looked at the sharp grass on the ground, then at her shoes. "My shoes are also made of this grass. Why don't they cut my feet? This sovereign has taken care of those." Jiuzun glanced at her feet. "Otherwise, your feet would have been cut 17 or 18 times already." So her shoes were really made by Jiuzun himself. She didn't expect this little fellow to have such an ability. He had such a high status, but she didn't expect him to know how to roast game and weave grass shoes. This was really out of her expectations. She couldn't help but look at Jiuzun a few more times. Jiuzun seemed to have understood her thoughts. He stood up and said, "Your shoes are made of magic. Don't think too much about it." She also liked shoes made of magic. As long as they didn't turn into a pile of grass midway, Ning Xuema didn't care about this. It wasn't convenient for her to bandage it with one hand, so she put her finger in front of Jiuzun. "Come, help me bandage it." She was used to ordering her subordinates around in her previous life, so it was easy for her to order Jiuzun around now. She didn't feel that there was anything wrong with her tone at all. Jiuzun looked at her again. He felt that he was spoiling this little girl too much, so he ignored her and walked away. Little Apple volunteered and stepped forward. Little Jijia, let me do it. It rolled on the ground, wanting to take the opportunity to return to its human form. However, it didn't expect that after rolling twice, it was still in its Qilin form. What was going on? The little Qilin blinked its eyes and turned its head left and right to look at its own body with a puzzled expression. No need to look. This sovereign has cast a spell on your body. You can't return to your human form for the next 10 years. Jiao Zun's words hit Kirin like a hammer. WH. Why? Kirin was so angry that he stuttered. With your power, forcefully transforming into a human will only consume your cultivation. Besides, did you think that I was joking with you? How can you do this? I want to become a human. Kirin's eyes were brimming with tears again. Jiao Zun's right hand formed a seal as he looked at it indifferently. Keep your tears back. Didn't your elders teach you that a man can bleed but not cry? Kirin was stunned, as if his sore spot had been poked. No one taught me anything. They all looked down on me, calling me a wild child, calling me a bastard. As it spoke, its voice choked with sobs. They all said that I was the jinx of the Kirin clan, refusing to care about me and even chasing me out. Ning Xuema didn't expect that Kirin would have such a sad history. It seemed that the world of mythological beasts was the same as the world of humans. There were all kinds of unfair treatment. She raised her hand and patted its head. Don't be sad. From now on, no one will bully you. It was the first beast pet she had taken in this world. Their lives were connected, so she would take care of it. Jiao Zun didn't think much of it, his tone still cold. Natural selection. If you want others to change their attitude towards you, you have to be strong and speak with your own strength. Chapter 235. Little Apple clenched its tiny claws. I want to be strong. That's why I've been searching for the ginseng fruit so that I can show them what I'm made of. You need to work hard to become strong. It's not about being opportunistic. With your talent, if you'd cultivated for 2,000 years, you'd already be one of the strongest in your tribe and not look like this now. The 9 Supremes were merciless once he started lecturing someone. His words made Kirin so embarrassed that he could not say anything else. Ning Xuema was moved. Although the 9 Supremes did not speak much, he was very good at educating people. She patted Kirin's head. Little Apple, you're a male beast. You should at least act like a man. You have to earn the respect of others with your own abilities. Crying will only make others look down on you. After a pause, she continued, I see that you look very good now. Why do you have to transform into a human? Little Apple lowered its head. The children of my tribe can transform into a human at 1,000 years old. They all have someone to teach them. I don't have anyone to teach me, but I don't want to be worse than others. Then, all the humans in your tribe who transform into humans have skin like this? Little Apple lowered its head even more. They become more like humans. Their skin is like yours and they don't have horns on their heads. Ning Xuema understood then. Little Apple's experience was actually a little like Naruto in Naruto. His parents were both dead and Naruto was treated as a monster wherever he went while Little Apple was treated as a jinx wherever he went. They both yearned to become stronger, to integrate into their tribe and be recognized by their people. It was just that they had used the wrong method. No wonder this little fellow was so sensitive and fragile. This was how it grew up. I believe in you. You'll become one of the strongest in your tribe one day. They'll be proud of you. But you have to work hard to cultivate. Ning Xuema patted its head again. Little Apple's eyes shone. It yearned to be recognized by others too much. I'll work hard. The tears in its eyes were gone, replaced by determination. It finally raised its head again. Ning Xuema was pleased. Kirin was just like a child, sensitive and fragile. Too much criticism would make her feel inferior, so a few words of praise were quite effective. It turned out that she also had the talent to educate children, ha ha ha. Her ability to educate people isn't inferior to a certain venerable one's. Ning Xuema glanced at Jiu Zun proudly. Sister, it's okay if I can't turn into a human, but I won't be able to bandage your wounds like this. Little Apple was still a little regretful. Suddenly, he had an idea. Why don't I lick it for you? Qilin's saliva also has a healing effect. That's right. A piece of Qilin tablet was enough to completely heal the skin on her legs. If it licked her legs, she might be able to heal them immediately, without even leaving a scar. Ning Xuema immediately put the injured finger in front of its mouth. Come, lick it. Her small hands were white and tender. Although there were some calluses on her palms, the shape of her hands was very beautiful. Her 10 fingers were like spring onions and as slender as fine jade. Faced with such a beautiful hand, Little Apple, who had always looked down on humans, no longer hesitated. It immediately stuck out its tongue to lick her injured finger. Before its tongue could touch her skin, the person in front of it suddenly staggered and avoided its tongue. It raised its head in surprise and saw Ning Xuema already standing in front of Jiu Zun. Chapter 236. It lifted its head in surprise to see Ning Xuema standing in front of Jiu Zun. Jiu Zun held her wrist with his left hand and glanced at her wound. His right hand was enveloped in a faint green glow that enveloped her entire finger. After a while, her wound showed signs of healing. After a while, there was only a faint scar left. Jiu Zun believed that this scar would disappear soon as well. Ning Xuema was pulled over involuntarily. She had wanted to throw a tantrum, but she kept her mouth shut when she saw how Jiu Zun was treating her wound. She lowered her head to look at him. His long eyelashes were lowered and he was still expressionless, but he was very serious about what he was doing. Her heart skipped a beat and she suddenly felt like kissing him again. She took a deep breath and suppressed this strange thought, reminding herself that this child in front of her was not a child. After treating her wound, she thanked him casually and had Kirin spray some water to wash her hands before following Jiu Zun to continue circling the ginseng tree, as if taking a stroll. The two of them walked leisurely, but Kirin could not hold it in after following them for 2 rounds. Where is the exit? Why were they circling here? Shut up. Jiu Zun threw out the word stiffly. The little Qilin choked and snorted in dissatisfaction. A voice that sounded like both a man and a woman rang in its head again. Stupid thing, you've been tricked by these 2 lowly humans. Kirin was not unfamiliar with this voice. It had heard it often in the past 1,000 years. It belonged to this ginseng tree, and it often used this voice to order it to do this and that. Kirin needed to eat its leaves to survive, so it did not dare to disobey it. However, it was already extremely disgusted with it. Their language was communicated directly in their minds, so outsiders could not hear them at all. I wasn't tricked. They'll bring me out. I don't want to eat your leaves anymore. Kirin retorted in its heart. It knew that the ginseng tree could hear it. You can't leave. You've been searching here for 1,000 years, haven't you? You can only enter and not leave. Stay here obediently and I can give you 3 leaves every day. They said there's a way. I don't want to eat your leaves anymore. They're so bitter. Listen to me and work with me to deal with them. After they become my fertilizer, I can give you a fruit. Haven't you always wanted one of my fruits? This condition was too tempting. Kirin couldn't help but look up at the ginseng fruits on the tree. The ginseng fruits swayed gently among the leaves, emitting a tempting fragrance. Kirin noticed that the facial features on the fruits had become softer, as if they were smiling and waving at him. Kirin swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It had been yearning for this ginseng fruit for too long. Didn't it go through so much risk and get locked up for 1,000 years just for this? It still had some reservations about what it said to Ningxuemo. In fact, it had tried to pluck the fruit more than once. It had tried all kinds of methods and had been punished by the ginseng fruit tree countless times. It had been hung upside down, whipped, starved, and even swallowed by the tree once. Although it had only eaten a small part of the ginseng fruit tree, it had still caused a knife-like pain for a long, long time. Now, the opportunity that it had been longing for was right in front of it. Should it seize it? Apparently, its hesitation was also sensed by the fruit tree. It immediately continued to tempt it, and then changed it into a threat. If you insist on going with them, I won't give you any more leaves to eat. Chapter 237. If you insist on following them, I will not give you any more leaves to eat. I will starve you to death and you will become my fertilizer. The little Qilin shuddered, and the voice of the ginseng fruit tree continued to resound in its mind. I want to let you go because you have accompanied me here for 1,000 years. Don't fail to appreciate my kindness. Kirin suddenly became angry. No, no. You want me to stay because you need me to give you water and nutrients. I remember when I first came in, you were only the size of a small pine tree. The leaves were as long as needles, and you only had 2 fruits, which were smaller than a baby's fist. The voice in his head was silent for a moment. Suddenly, it sneered, so what? I can still live without you, but you can't live for more than a month without my help. I will only give you 1/4 of an hour to think. If you don't make a decision, I will deal with you as well and let you die together. Kirin was silent for a moment. What do you want to do? Was it wavering? The voice of the ginseng fruit tree was obviously happy. Listen to me. There will be a few red fruits in the northeast corner behind me. Give them the fruits and tell them that you have eaten them sometimes. Are the fruits poisonous? You don't have to worry about that. You just need to do what I say and give them the fruits. Kirin was silent for a moment again. Aren't you very capable? You can carry me around with your roots. Why don't you use the same method to deal with them? Why poison them? Humph, what do you know? That kid is not easy to deal with. He hurt me with his palm. The ginseng fruit tree said with resentment. It seemed to know that it had let it slip, so it became impatient again. You don't have to worry about that. Just do as I say. I will give you a fruit after you succeed. Isn't that red fruit of yours very poisonous? Can it kill them directly? Humph, of course. It is the most poisonous fruit in the world. They will die immediately if they take a bite. Don't worry, before I kill them, I will use a spell to cancel the 10-year contract between you and that human. I won't let you get hurt. No. I won't let you hurt that little sister. She's a good person. Kirin suddenly retorted, I won't help you. You're a bad guy. The ginseng fruit tree was speechless. It sneered and said, how dare you talk to me like that? Are you tired of living? Kirin stepped back again. No matter what, I won't help you anymore. I won't let you hurt these 2 people. I don't want your fruits, I want to cultivate on my own. The ginseng fruit tree still wanted to say something, but it suddenly heard Jiao Zun's cold mocking voice. Little apple, at least you're not stupid. Come here. This voice had suddenly appeared in Kirin's mind, causing it to tremble in fright as it looked towards Jiao Zun. Jiao Zun and Ningxuemo had already returned to the original tunnel entrance. Kirin was busy negotiating with the ginseng fruit tree, so she didn't realize that she had actually fallen behind. It paused for a moment, then hurriedly ran over, looking at Jiuzun with wide eyes. You can hear my conversation with it. Jiuzun was disdainful. Nonsense. Kirin was about to break out in a cold sweat. I didn't listen to it. I didn't want to hurt you guys. If you had listened to it, do you think you would still be alive now? Jiuzun's voice was cold. Kirin didn't dare to speak anymore. It looked at Jiuzun in fear. Who was this Jiuzun? How could he be so strong? Chapter 238. To show its loyalty, Kirin spoke again. I'm very loyal to my sister. Look, it tried to tempt me with a ginseng fruit, but I didn't waver. Call her master from now on. Jiuzun corrected it and looked outside, his lips curling into a mocking smile. Do you really think it's a ginseng fruit? Even Ning Xuema was stunned by his words. Kirin's eyes widened. It's not a ginseng fruit. But it looks so similar to the legends. This is a ghost face fruit. Eating a ginseng fruit can prolong one's life and increase one's cultivation. The ghost face fruit only looks like a ginseng fruit, but it has no other effects. Jiuzun revealed the true origin of the ginseng fruit tree. Kirin was stunned. It had been guarding this place for 1,000 years just for a ghost face fruit. What was even more infuriating was that this stupid tree didn't even let it eat this useless fruit. To think it treated it so well, watering it 3 days and pulling the weeds 2 days. Although Ning Xuema didn't hear the conversation between Kirin and the ghost face fruit tree, she could guess the gist of the situation from Jiuzun's conversation with it. She rubbed Kirin's head. Poor baby, you've been tricked by this stupid tree. Do you want revenge? Yes. Kirin's voice was very loud this time. Good. Ning Xuema stood up with a flick of her finger. Then let's suck all the water from this tree. Suck it dry. Kirin was speechless. It was hesitant because it had used this method before when it threatened the tree to give it a fruit. It wanted to suck all the water from the tree, but it had to get close to the tree to do it. It couldn't be more than 5 feet away from the tree, and these 5 meters were within the attack range of the tree's roots. It had been caught by the tree's roots before it could even cast the spell, and had been whipped half to death. It told Ning Xuema about its misgivings. Ning Xuema smiled. Don't be afraid this time. The 9 Supremes have already set up a fire sealing formation around this broken tree. When the formation is activated, this ghost tree won't be able to attack you at all. Kirin's eyes brightened as he looked at Jiuzun. Really? Jiuzun glanced at Ning Xuema. He hadn't explained the formation to Ning Xuema when he was setting it up, but he hadn't expected her to see through it. Since everything had been set up, there was no time to lose. Jiuzun drew a talisman in the air with his finger and flicked it at the tree. With a loud bang, a wall of fire suddenly rose around the ghost face fruit tree. For Kirin, everything that happened after that was an incomparably comfortable moment. Under the cover of the wall of fire, the roots of the ghost face tree were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws inside the wall of fire, but no matter what, they were unable to attack the outside of the wall of fire. Kirin, on the other hand, was squatting 10 meters away from the ghost-faced fruit tree, desperately extracting water and nutrients from it. It was very fast. In less than 2 hours, all the leaves on the ghost-faced fruit tree had been sucked dry. Even the alluring fruit had fallen to the ground. During this time, the ghost-faced fruit tree had struggled, begged for mercy, threatened, and even said that it was willing to tell them the real location of the ginseng fruit tree. Its voice was so pitiful that even an evil person wouldn't be able to bear to hear it. However, Jiuzun and Ning Xuemo were unmoved. They sat at the entrance of the tunnel, watching as the fruit tree slowly withered and weakened. In the end, the ghost-faced fruit tree that had lost all its water disappeared in the fire, turning into ashes. When the tree was begging for mercy, Ning Xuema couldn't help but glance at Jiuzun beside her. Chapter 239. He pursed his lips slightly as he sat there, his fingers casually forming seals. The firelight reflected in his deep blue eyes, flickering bit by bit, but the bottom of his eyes was still ice cold. When the fire finally extinguished, Jiuzun slowly stood up. "Let's go." Ning Xuema smiled lightly. "All right." She led the way towards the tree. Kirin quickly jumped up and followed beside her. "The tree has been burned to ashes. There's no need to look anymore. Finding the exit is more important." Ning Xuema patted its head again. "The exit is right under the tree, stupid apple." Kirin was stunned. It looked towards that area and saw a big black hole. The inside of the hole was burnt and white smoke was still rising. It couldn't see what was at the bottom of the hole. Jiuzun looked at Ning Xuema again. This little girl was terrifyingly smart. For every step he took, she could guess 10 steps he would take. She could see through it with just a little bit. The big hole with the tree roots was indeed a passage to the outside. After Kirin used water to extinguish the fire, it jumped down with Ning Xuema and Jiuzun. The sky was blue like glass. The clouds were white like floating cotton. The 2 humans and 1 beast jumped out of the big hole and landed on a mountain ridge. There were jagged rocks of all shapes and sizes all around, covering the entire mountaintop. In the distance, there was a lush primeval forest. Ning Xuema took in a deep breath of the fresh mountain air. How nice! It felt so good to be able to escape. It felt so good to be able to breathe in the fresh air outside again. Kirin was also excited as it jumped happily on the mountain ridge. It had yearned for the sunlight outside for a long time. It had been so long. "Little apple, where are we?" Ning Xuema grabbed its horn and asked. Little apple blinked its big eyes and looked here and there. Finally, it was a little embarrassed. "I don't know, you don't know. Didn't you say you've passed through all the mountains here? That was more than 1,000 years ago. Many mountains have changed in appearance. This is the first time I've seen this place." Ning Xuema then turned to ask Jiuzun, "Jiuzun, do you know which peak this is?" "8th summit, Rubble Slope." Jiuzun spat out these words and turned to leave. "9th Supremes, where are you going?" Little Apple subconsciously blocked his path. Jiuzun glanced at it and didn't answer its question. His sleeves fluttered as he walked towards the south. He was really straightforward. After saying that he wanted to break up, they went their separate ways. As expected, he didn't delay for even a moment. He didn't even say goodbye. Ning Xuema's long eyelashes trembled slightly. She looked at his back for a moment and smiled. "Little Apple, come back. The 9 Supremes has his own place to go, let's go together." Little Apple could only walk back. It returned to Ning Xuema's side and rubbed against the corner of her clothes. It was actually very afraid of Jiuzun, but after this series of adventures, it had become a little dependent on him. It felt that the 3 of them should adventure together and not go their separate ways. It watched as Jiuzun's small body quickly disappeared into the forest. It then turned to ask Ning Xuema, "Where are we going now? All the beasts in this mountain are afraid of you, aren't they?" Ning Xuema wanted to confirm it again. "Of course. I said I'm the king of beasts." Little Apple puffed out its chest. Ning Xuema yawned. "That's great." She raised her head to look at the sky. It was already 4 or 5 in the afternoon. The sun slid to the west and hung there. The sun's rays warmed one's body. Little apple, guard me. I'll take a light nap here first. Chapter 240. Ning Xuema found a big rock and lay down. She closed her eyes. She was too tired. Since the adventure started yesterday, she had been risking her life in all kinds of dangerous situations. She hadn't had a good night's sleep. It was sunny here, and she had the king of all beasts by her side. She could finally relax. Once she relaxed, she realized that her joints were sore and painful, as if they were about to fall apart. She really wanted to rest. She just wanted to take a nap. Just a nap, even if it was only for half an hour. She fell asleep almost as soon as she closed her eyes. Don't be afraid of a godlike opponent, but be afraid of a pig-like teammate. Ning Xuema had the deepest understanding of this sentence when she was with Little Apple. She had asked this little fellow to guard her for an hour, but this little fellow actually got bored and ran into the forest to hunt after guarding her for a while. He left her here alone without any cover and slept until the sky turned dark. Although the 8th peak was not as perverted as the 9th peak, it was still dangerous enough. Ning Xuema had only rested here for a short while, and a magical beast rushed over after following her scent. A sleeping Ning Xuema was naturally a delicious meal in the eyes of the magical beast. The 8th peak was also a place where humans were rarely seen. Thus, this magical beast was like this. It was the first time it saw a human, so it was more cautious about the unknown. It walked over step by step quietly. Its movements were lighter than a cat's, and its fangs were sharper than a tiger's. Seeing that it was approaching the big rock where Ning Xuema was sleeping, it slowed down. After looking at Ning Xuema for a moment, its mane slowly stood up. It bent its body and tensed its hind legs. This was a posture that indicated that it was about to attack. There was a rustling sound around. The magical beast jumped up and pounced on Ning Xuema at lightning speed. After all, Ning Xuema had been a secret agent before, so she was very alert. Even if she was sleeping, her special ability to sense danger was also very strong. It was this keen sixth sense that saved her life at such a critical moment. When the magical beast flew towards her, her intuition as a special agent made her body react before her brain. Her body suddenly rolled backwards like lightning. He narrowly avoided the big mouth of the magical beast and fell to the ground. Almost out of instinct, she rolled 18 times on the ground before jumping up. She finally saw the face of the bastard who attacked her while she was sleeping. Then, he cursed in his heart. She remembered that she had vaguely seen a cartoon where the main character could have the eyes of an eagle, the speed of a leopard, and the strength of a bear when fighting. Now, she finally saw the real-life version. There was a magical beast 10 meters away from her. It had eagle eyes, the head of a wolf, the body of a leopard, the tail of a tiger, and most importantly, a pair of eagle wings. The worst part was that it was even bigger than a grizzly bear. He stood there like a small mountain, his ferocious aura causing the surrounding temperature to drop by quite a bit. When a human and a beast met on a narrow path, there was no need for any nonsense. After the magical beast missed its first attack, it immediately began its second wave of attack. Ning Xuema did not even have time to think about anything and began to fight with it with all her might. This was the 8th peak's magical beast. Even the martial arts genius Ji Yunhuang was surrounded by dangers when he came here. He almost lost his life, not to mention Ning Xuema, a psychokinesis trash who couldn't even be considered half a bottle of vinegar. Chapter 241. She had only fought with this magical beast for a short while, but she had already met with danger several times. If it wasn't for her nimble movements and the fact that she had these big rocks as cover, she would have already become food in this magical beast's stomach. Although this magical beast's body was huge, its movements were more nimble and faster than a civet cat. Adding on the fact that it had wings, its body could turn in a circle as it wished. Therefore, Ning Xuema had a hard time dodging its claws. There were a few times when she flew past its claws, and her clothes were almost caught by its claws. One person and one beast were like a whirlwind circling around the rocks. From time to time, a big rock would be smashed into the air by this magical beast, and then fall to the ground. The momentum was astonishing, and the scene was frightening. Little apple. Little apple. Ning Xuema was dodging with all her might, and at the same time, she was calling out to that unruly Kirin. When she first woke up and saw this magical beast, she thought that Kirin had been eaten by this magical beast, but after sensing it, she knew that she was wrong. She had established a blood contract with Kirin, so she could sense whether it was alive or not. She could even sense its mood at this moment, and it seemed to be very happy. This little bastard. She didn't need to guess to know that it should have gone to have fun. Roar. Suddenly, a clear and long whistle came from afar. The whistle was long and clear, as if it came from the sky. That magical beast that was crazily attacking Ning Xuema heard this whistle, and its body suddenly trembled. It stopped in its tracks and looked in the direction where the whistle came from. Suddenly, its tail clamped, and it no longer cared about attacking Ning Xuema. It turned around and ran away. Roar. Another long whistle came. This time, the whistle took a few turns, and there was a faint sense of threat. That magical beast's feet stopped, and its body trembled like a sieve. It was obvious that it was extremely scared, but it didn't dare to run away. Ning Xuema's heart moved, and she also looked in the direction where the whistle came from. From the depths of the forest, a blue figure was like lightning, and it was flying towards this direction. Almost in the blink of an eye, it had already rushed to this pile of rocks. Little apple. This guy is finally back. The moment Kirin saw Ning Xuema, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. His eyes quickly turned to the magical beast, and he walked over step by step. The magical beast's body trembled in fear. It seemed to want to retreat, but its legs were weak and it couldn't retreat at all. Kirin's body was obviously much smaller than it, but it was like a mouse that had seen a cat. All it could do was tremble. Kirin didn't hesitate. He raised his head and roared. His body flew up like he was stepping on clouds. He landed on the magical beast and slammed his claw on the beast's head. The magical beast's head didn't seem to be damaged, but it fell down with a loud bang. Its four hooves kicked the ground, and then it stopped moving. Kirin's mouth was on its forehead, as if she was sucking something. She looked very pleased. Is it delicious? Ning Xuema sat down opposite it. Delicious. It's delicious. Kirin shook his head and replied subconsciously. Did you have fun? Very fun. I ran to 2 small mountains and caught 3 magical beasts. This kind of beast spirit is still the best. It's much better than those rotten leaves. Kirin was in high spirits. It seems that you are indeed the king of all beasts. You are quite capable, and you can protect yourself in this world. There's no need for you to follow me anymore. After we go down the mountain, let's part ways. Ning Xuema stood up. Kirin finally reacted. It quickly grabbed the corner of her clothes with its claw. Master, are you angry? Chapter 242. Ning Xuema glanced at it coldly, pulled the corner of her clothes, and turned to leave. She didn't want it anymore. Kirin panicked. It moved in front of her and said, Master, don't be angry. Little Apple knows it's wrong. Please don't abandon me. It had finally found someone who treated it well. Ning Xuema continued to ignore it, bypassing it and continuing to advance. Master, please forgive me. I really know it's my fault. I shouldn't have left you here alone. I won't do it again. Kirin was smart enough to know where it was wrong. Ning Xuema stopped and looked at it seriously. Little Apple, there are not many true friends in this world, and every one of them is worth cherishing. When I established the contract with you, I treated you as a friend. A friend's safety is your own safety. When a friend's life is in your hands, you should protect him at all costs. If I didn't react fast enough, I would have died here, and you would have been implicated. Kirin lowered its head. I was wrong. This little guy was still a child. Because it lacked education, it didn't know what was right and what was wrong. Although Ning Xuema was the boss of the Secret Service, her subordinates had already become her subordinates. There were some things that she only needed to instruct them and didn't need to say anything else. She wasn't good at educating people, especially a child. Looking at Kirin, who was drooping its head, she felt a headache. She suppressed the anger in her heart and took the opportunity to educate it. You have to keep your promise. Since you made a promise, you have to keep your promise. As the saying goes, a promise is worth 1,000 gold. Kirin stood in front of her obediently and listened to her lecture. From time to time, it rubbed its big head against the corner of her clothes. Even though Ning Xuema's anger was overflowing to the heavens, it was completely wiped away by him. She finally stopped talking and glanced at him. The little guy was really obedient now. It blinked its big eyes and looked at her. When she stopped talking, it seemed to want more. Master, what else? Ning Xuema was speechless. Little Apple, don't you hate me for scolding you like this? Kirin shook his head. No, I don't. I know you're only saying that for my own good. After all these years, I can't find anyone to say that to me. They all hate me. When he said the last sentence, his tone became gloomy. Ning Xuema wasn't a soft-hearted person. At this moment, looking at the little Qilin, her mood couldn't help but soften. She raised her hand and patted its head. Don't be sad. You have me in the future. The little Qilin fiercely nodded its big head and looked at her eagerly. Then, have you forgiven me? Don't make the same mistake again. Yes, I won't do it again. Kirin promised. Ning Xuema couldn't help but rub its head again. You really look like my mother. Kirin rubbed her hand. Ning Xuema. She was stunned. Including her age in her previous life, she was only 22 years old. Where did such a big Qilin come from? This little guy's nonsense was really shocking. Didn't you say that you've never seen your mother? Ning Xuema asked tentatively. Yes, I've never seen her. No, I've seen her before. But I was too young to remember. I don't remember what she looked like. There was some regret in the little Qilin's voice. Its pair of beautiful big eyes looked at Ning Xuema again. However, in my imagination, my mother should be as beautiful and magnanimous as you. You would scold me if I did something wrong and praise me if I did something right. Chapter 243. Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh when she saw the yearning look on its face. How much does this Kirin lack of fatherly and motherly love? Some education was enough, so Ning Xuema didn't say anything more. Her stomach rumbled a few times. Kirin heard it and immediately said, Master, are you hungry? Why don't we roast the demon tiger meat? Let's roast it and eat it to vent your anger. It turned around to look for the demon beast that had fallen to the ground. It turned around a big rock and suddenly exclaimed, this. What's going on? Its voice was filled with shock. Ning Xuema's figure flashed and returned to the place where the demon beast was lying. She was stunned. In just a short while, the majestic and mighty demon tiger's flesh and blood had disappeared without a trace. There was only a skeleton left. Little apple, are you sure you only sucked its beast spirit and not its flesh and blood? No, I only consume beast spirits. Its flesh and blood should be intact. Kirin started to walk around the skeleton, trying to find out the reason. Ning Xuema's expression changed slightly. Although she didn't know what was going on, she sensed a huge danger. Don't bother about it, let's go quickly. She pulled Kirin's horn and signaled it to go quickly. Kirin was still unconvinced and wanted to find out the reason. What kind of thing is taking advantage of me? Go quickly. Ning Xuema's voice became stern. She jumped onto a big rock and was about to fly forward. There was a loud rumbling sound under her feet, as if there was a sudden earthquake. Countless big rocks shook violently. In the blink of an eye, a huge black hole appeared on the ground. The little Qilin was standing there, and it was caught off guard. With a shriek, it fell straight into the hole. Little apple. The big rock under Ning Xuema's feet also rolled forward a few times. Luckily, she was quick and flew away in time. Everything happened in an instant. Ning Xuema didn't have enough time to grab the little Qilin. She could only watch helplessly as it fell into the pitch-black hole that she couldn't see the bottom of. The earthquake hadn't stopped yet. Countless boulders were rolling towards the hole. Master! Master! Kirin's cries came faintly from the big hole. She was like a frightened child, helpless and miserable. Don't abandon me, Ning Xuema's mind exploded as number 2's face flashed across her mind. She would never watch her companion die in front of her again. Even if it was just a Kirin. Almost without thinking, she jumped into the big hole as well. That hole was not as deep as she had imagined. Ning Xuema relied on the heavenly silkworm's entanglement to descend for about 20 to 30 meters before she finally stepped on solid ground. Above her, rocks continued to tumble down. The momentum was astonishing. Under such circumstances, she couldn't jump forward. Ning Xuema could only dodge the boulders while calling out Kirin's name. Master! Kirin flew over and knocked away a boulder that was flying towards Ning Xuema. It used its beak to drag her to a corner. Are you okay? Ning Xuema looked at it. Due to the increase in her inner strength, her eyesight had improved a lot. Although the big hole was dark, she could still see Kirin's appearance. Master, I thought you had abandoned me. The little Qilin sobbed. I thought I would be locked up in the darkness for countless years. It was clearly scared out of its wits as it leaned against Ning Xuema and slightly trembled. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.